7 o'clock. Welcome to Mornings with Richard Frost.
Sophy and Wilf, good morning from me as well. And it's been a busy start to the morning already.
The price of oil skyrockets, sending Asian markets plummeting as the impact of the war in Iran begins to spread much further than just the Middle East.
In an exclusive interview with Sky News, Qatar's Prime Minister tells us he feels a deep sense of betrayal after Iranian attacks on his own country.
This miscalculation by the Iranians to attack the Gulf countries has destroyed everything.
We'll discuss what we can expect in the coming days as Iran's new supreme leader is announced. Plus,
a huge fire engulfs Glasgow Central Station after starting in a nearby vape shop. There's going to be, obviously, travel disruption today. Good morning, welcome to the programme. Since the war in the Middle East began just over a week ago, we've constantly been warned about the economic implications. And those fears are quickly becoming a reality with some staggering moves overnight. The price of oil has gone up more in the last 24 hours than on any other single day in the last 6 years.
That's right. Brent crude, the international gauge of oil prices, surged to $114 a barrel, up 25% overnight, sending markets tumbling across the board. Let's just have a look at this price. It has pared back a tiny bit in the last hour or two. So Brent's currently sitting at $108 a barrel. It was $114 moments ago. It's still up 17% overnight. And that follows what was already the biggest weekly surge last week of a move of 35% on record. You can see it on this chart, very clear to see oil prices surging in the last couple of hours, surging, of course, in the last week. And that also, by the way, followed, Sophie, a 25% surge from January before the war broke out on the expectation of possible conflict. I just want to remind viewers of what the former Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, told us on the programme last week. For every 10% increase in oil prices, the Treasury's rule of thumb is that that can lower GDP growth by 0.1% and increase inflation by 0.1%. Pretty much since the start of the January, we've doubled. We're up about 100% there or thereabouts, which would imply, based on rule of thumb, that we might see GDP reduced by 1 full percentage point if these oil price surges persist. Let's snapshot the scale of this move as well, just on a 6-year chart, because it brings into sight, of course, a pretty crucial moment with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. You can see the scale of that increase in oil prices in 2022 compared to today's, pretty much of the same scale. By the way, also, you can see the fall at COVID when people thought no one's going to travel anymore. Again, the fall there about the same scale as the increase we're seeing right at this point in time. What does this mean for equity markets? Let's look at Asian markets for you because it shows a massive slide. We're talking about a 6% slide in the Nikkei. We're talking about a 7% slide in the Korean market. They're much in the eye of the storm because a lot of this oil through the Middle East goes to Asia. They're net energy importers, Japan and Korea. So they've been in the eye of the storm. The FTSE 100 is only expected to open down by 1% as we stand. Sophie, I'm going to be very much looking at what our borrowing costs do, though, at 8 a.m. in just under an hour. Let's have a look at this chart. This is the 10-year borrowing cost for the UK over the last 6 months. Last week, we saw quite a big surge, as you can see. Now, it's not the highs that we saw 6 months or so ago, 4.8%. Last week, we rose from about 4.35% to about 4.7%, Sophie. This hasn't been updated yet today because the bond market isn't open yet. So we saw a 0.35% surge in our 10-year borrowing cost last week. It will definitely rise this morning. The question is by how much. But that rise, Sophie, that we saw last week in the UK was bigger than France, it was bigger than the US, it was bigger than Japan. And it sort of revealed the extent to which here in the UK we are vulnerable to these types of economic shocks. And as much as I'll be looking at 8 o'clock at how the FTSE 100 opens, I'll be looking much more at how borrowing costs open.
And borrowing costs, what does that mean for, the average person on the street?
It means that if you're about to get a mortgage, the rate that they were discussing with you 2 weeks ago is probably going to go away. What it means with almost certainty now, a week or two ago, we were expecting a rate cut on March the 19th, the next Bank of England interest rate decision. That won't happen. We were still expecting perhaps another 2 cuts or so later this year. Whether they happen remains to be seen, again, if this all persists. But I think the bigger point is that this is going to impact all of the government's finances. This is going to change the prospects that we have of being able to invest in certain projects, being able to spend more here or there, because, you know, we're already spending 5% more than we raise in taxes as a nation. And one of our biggest costs, energy, is going up.
And I guess, you know, it matters for the government spending, but also our own spending as well, right? Because if inflation starts to go up, then that effectively means that all of our money goes less far as well. I just remember, you know, sitting in this place, I can't even believe it was a week ago for the spending forecast when Rachel Reeves was talking about falling inflation and what a big moment that was and a victory for the government. I mean, it feels like it was another lifetime. Yeah,
exactly right. Everything's kind of out the window. Again, it comes down to if this persists. So the scale that we're seeing in these moves in oils is bigger than Russia's invasion of Ukraine. If suddenly we get U-turns on either side and there's peace tomorrow, then the price will drop again. It needs to persist at this level and it will really hurt things. And that's really, by the way, why oil prices have jumped so much overnight. It's that there's no sign of de-escalation from the Iranian side. We're going to talk about that in a second with Yalla's interview with the Qatar PM, but also President Trump saying overnight short-term oil prices is a very small price for the USA to pay. So again, on both sides over the weekend, you didn't get any signs of de-escalation, and that's why we're seeing it play out in markets.
Yeah, and we're also seeing it, of course, play out across the region, right? This is not a localised conflict. This is a conflict which is dragging in multiple countries, including Qatar. The Prime Minister of Qatar making an urgent plea to de-escalate, telling Sky News and that Iran has made a dangerous miscalculation in attacking Gulf countries like his own. He was speaking exclusively to Yalda Hakim.
EU have always tried to maintain diplomatic relations with Iran. Certainly Qatar has, and you know, they've tried in many ways to maintain those relationships despite Iran facing global isolation. Do you feel betrayed?
Well, of course, it is a big sense of betrayal. This is the second time. That's why it's also, like, for us, it's been something really significant to see the attack, which was showing that being pre-planned. Like, once the war started, just maybe an hour after the start of the war, Qatar and the other Gulf countries being attacked right away. And all of us, before this war and repeatedly, we've been saying and repeating that we are not going to take part of any attacks or any wars against our neighbors. We would like to see a peaceful neighborhood. We were helping Iran and the United States in reaching diplomatic solutions. But this miscalculation by the Iranians to attack the Gulf countries has destroyed everything. Our countries don't want to be part of this war. And, we would like to see them stopping right away.
As you say, a disaster for the world. It's not just about the region.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, we have seen what are the cascading effects of this escalation, and we are just a week from this conflict. And it's we need to ensure first that Iran should stop all the attacks against the Gulf countries and the other countries that they are attacking, and they are not party of this war. We need to seek a way to de-escalate the situation and to find diplomatic solution whenever it's possible.
Much has been made about the UK and Europe's response or the lack of. What's your take on how they have reacted to this conflict?
Well, honestly, from our perspective, all our European partners has been providing us with significant support, whether it's politically, whether it's in any of the supply chain issues that we have. United Kingdom has provided an outstanding support for Qatar. We have the joint squadron working together with our pilots, and we are very grateful for this partnership and for this alliance. I don't know why they say that Europe doesn't do anything, maybe on the general level, but on the level of bilateral relationship with us and with other GCC partners, we have seen them demonstrating a great friendship.
Riyadh joins us now from Doha. I mean, you, I think, really felt his reaction there in that interview. What were your kind of main takeaways?
Good morning, Sophie. Good morning, Wilf. Well, you just get the sense of not just the frustration, but anger there from the Qatari Prime Minister, not just from him. I've spoken to leaders across the Gulf who are furious about the way they've been dragged into this conflict. And you heard there from the Qatari Prime Minister talking about how this was all pre-planned from the Iranian side. So no matter how this was going to start or end, the Gulf countries were going to get dragged into this because they saw this as part of the Iranian regime's big plan on how to respond and retaliate should the United States and Israel attack Iran. We're now 10 days into this conflict, and what we can see is there's still confusion about what the objectives of this conflict are and what, frankly, the end game is. What is the day after plan for this conflict? The death toll continues to rise. The Red Crescent Society in Iran says that more than 1,800 people have been killed across the region, the majority of them in Iran, and the bulk of them, those young schoolgirls who were killed, almost 185 people on the first day of the conflict, the majority of them young schoolgirls who went to school that morning and never came back home. So there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of frustration, and the calculus that Iran made was that if they drag in the Gulf states, which frankly, you know, the energy infrastructure across this region, the Qatari Prime Minister talked about being one of the biggest suppliers of fertilizer to the world. 20% of gas production supplies the world as well. This won't just have a regional implication. This has massive global implications as well. And we're seeing those that impact already. He talked about all of that. And of course, the human cost of this. At the weekend, we saw Tehran burning. We saw Beirut burning. We saw a 7th US serviceman killed. The name hasn't been announced until the family have been informed. So, you know, this is having major global implications, economic implications, and humanitarian implications, and frankly, no end in sight. And of course, you saw that news that the new supreme leader has been named the son of the slain supreme leader. So as far as the Iranian regime is concerned, that will be a continuation of where they have been for the last 47 years.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yada, great stuff. We'll be back out with Yada later in the programme. And of course, so much more to come as well from her interview with the Qatar PM. As she mentioned there at the end, there is a new supreme leader in Iran, 10 days, of course, after the war began. These are pictures as the announcement was made. Mojtaba Khamenei is the son of the previous Ayatollah. Iranian state TV broadcasting footage of the appointment, which was made by Iran's 88-member Assembly of Experts, the clerical body in charge of choosing and then supervising the supreme leader, which was set up after the 1979 Iranian Revolution.
So let's give you a bit of detail about who the new leader is. So Mojtaba is 56 years old. He's the second son of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who, of course, was killed in that US strike alongside Mojtaba's mother, wife and daughter.
Until today, he's only been a mid-ranking cleric and not a senior Ayatollah.
But Mojtaba did also serve in Iran's paramilitary Revolutionary Guard during the country's war with Iraq in the 1980s. And that, of course, means he's got those important connections with senior figures in the military. Not a bad thing, of course, if you're hoping to win the selection. Let's get out to Diana, who's in Jerusalem. Diana, how has this news gone down in Israel, and what does it suggest about the approach Iran's going to take going forward?
Good morning. Well, I just watched an IDF video about Mojtaba, which said, like father, like son. And they have said to Iran, whoever is your next leader will be a hunted man. So we shall have to see how long Mojtaba Khamenei survives, given the fact that they have killed his father, his wife, his mother, you know, which I think will make the spirit of resistance burn even stronger within him. And that is what's, you know, fueled him in the same way as his father for many, many years. You said there that he'd fought during the Iran-Iraq War. He joined one of their most celebrated battalions towards the end of the war, which is exactly where he formed these contacts between the volunteer forces who were fighting there, which evolved into the Basij militia, the paramilitary group that is used to sort of execute security all across the country, and particularly in the last 20 years, keep the people under control. Then he went and studied in a seminary for a long time, and then he's really been a key figure behind the scenes for his father, integrating the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guard, into the structures of the Iranian regime, into the economy, into the political scene, forming the connections between them and the militant clerics. And he is considered to be arguably even more hardline than his father was. So if you thought that Iran's clerics might see this as an opportunity to try and make a nod to the West and appoint somebody a bit more pragmatic, a bit more moderate, then that is certainly not the course that they have taken. And I think in lieu of the interview that Yalda just did with the Qatari Prime Minister, it's interesting if you consider the fact that, you know, Mojtaba fought as a teenager in the Iran-Iraq War, where the Arab states, the Gulf countries, were essentially the enemy. They'd allied themselves with Iraq. The Gulf Cooperation Council was formed at the beginning of the 80s to counter the threat of Shia ideological fervour coming from Iran. So for him, the notion of, you know, US military bases in these Arab countries is still a source of rancour. So I think that, you know, for the Arab countries too, this appointment represents a continuation of this grave threat that is coming from Iran.
Thank you very much indeed, Diana, speaking to us there from Jerusalem. Well, of course, we know that Donald Trump has reacted very badly to the decision by Keir Starmer not to immediately allow the US to use UK air bases. And it feels like that diplomatic spat has got worse over the weekend. We can bring in Alex Rogers, who's our political correspondent. What's the latest?
So Donald Trump issuing more criticism over the weekend. He was sort of suggesting that we'd been too slow to get involved, and obviously we've been sending things out there, RAF jets, F-35 jets, and we're preparing, I think, possibly another aircraft carrier. But for Donald Trump, it seems like it's too little, too late, and that initial decision, that's what he remembers, that initial decision not to allow him to use those air bases. That seems to have, the anger over that is not dissipated for Donald Trump, and he's continuing to push that, really. And
I guess big questions for Keir Starmer as well, going forward with today, with what's going to happen with inflation, gas prices, energy.
That's his focus, really, is, you know, is this in Britain's interest? How's it going to affect people at home? How's it going to affect the cost of living crisis? That's his focus, and that seems to be completely at odds with what Donald Trump wants, which is us to just follow and do whatever he says, really.
Trump and Starmer did speak, though?
Yes, they had a phone call. I think it was yesterday. It seemed quite brief. I think Starmer, there were condolences over some of those US troops that died, but it seems to have summed up really the frosty and strained relationship that they're having at the moment.
Great stuff, Alex. Thanks so much. Now, don't forget, today, 1 p.m, Yad will have a special programme live from Doha with all of the very latest from Iran and the region. 1 p.m, Iran War Special programme.
Now, a huge fire has forced the closure of Scotland's busiest railway station until further notice as well, so we don't know how long it's going to happen for.
It's all happening at Glasgow Central Station. The fire broke out at a vape shop and engulfed the 4-storey B-listed Victorian building on Union Street that was housing that vape shop. Sadly, is here with more. And the pictures of the fire are really quite striking, and the impact on travel today might be quite striking too.
Yeah, it's a huge fire. You can see from these pictures just how high those flames have gone. It started at a ground floor vape shop, as you say, but we can see that entire building now, we can see from those pictures, then went up in flames. Anyone familiar with Glasgow will know exactly where this is. It is on Union Street, which is a really busy shopping district. It is right next to the central Glasgow Central Station, so lots of sort of outcome from that, the trains being cancelled. People will know this street. It is where the Blue Lagoon fish and chip shop is, which is a really famous fish and chips. Chunks of the building can be seen collapsing from that. From these drone pictures, you can see where the station is. It's just behind there, the glass roof of the station apparent in those pictures. At its height, 18 fire appliances and specialist resources were deployed, including 3 high-reach vehicles. We know that 9 of those appliances remain at the scene. And just to give you an indication of how big this fire was, the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service said they were first alerted to this at 3:46 yesterday afternoon. At 8:30, they issued another statement saying that they're still tackling it. And our pictures that we're seeing now were taken just before midnight. And the latest is that even as of 5 a.m. this morning, there are still parts of that fire left to be tackled. Glaswegians waking up this morning to a dreadful sight, no doubt, once the sun comes up.
Celia, thanks so much for that.
Well, let's talk to the government next, shall we? Steve Reid, the Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government, is here with us. Look, it's been a dramatic day, hasn't it? Oil has gone up more in the last 24 hours than in any other single day in the last 6 years. And I guess we'll wait to see what happens when the UK markets open at 8. How worried should we be?
Well, there's no threat to supplies into the country at the moment. The government, of course, all of us are looking at what's happening with the oil prices. We have to keep that under review to make sure that we're taking any action that might be required. But we don't know how long this situation is going to go on for. But the government is keeping a very close eye on the situation and monitoring it. But I do think of course, there'll be the short-term concerns. But long-term, it does show that the government is doing the right thing, I think, in seeking to move from a fossil fuel-based economy towards a clean energy economy, because that would protect us from the kind of shock that we may be seeing in the Gulf right now and what happened when Russia invaded Ukraine.
Just on that, because, you know, UK gas prices jump more than elsewhere. Wholesale gas up 70%. We're reliant more on gas imports. We've got less gas storage than in Europe. And I know you make the point that this strengthens the argument for fossil fuel, for renewables.
Yeah.
But others are saying that actually there is another way that we need to look at as well. So the boss of Octopus Energy, for example, we should use what's available from the North Sea. While the price is set globally, there is no point shipping gas from the other side of the world when we have it here. Well, it's not either or.
We are using what's available in the North Sea. None of the contracts have been cancelled for mining oil from the North Sea. But
you haven't changed. But it's important to be. Sorry. I'm only jumping because I think it's important not to mislead. Like, we haven't changed our policy on North Sea and not for new licences, have we?
Well, no, there aren't new licences, but we haven't cancelled any of the existing licences. The key thing is we need to shift away from reliance on fossil fuel. Even if we were, you know, the oil that comes out of the North Sea is no cheaper for British people or oil that comes from Russia or from the Middle East or from any of the other hotspots around the world, because the price is set globally. So it doesn't help the concerns that you've just raised about prices.
So the boss of Octopus Energy is wrong then? He's wrong?
Well, I think he said in the quote that you just heard, I haven't heard him speak himself, but he did say the price is set globally. So whatever we get out of the North Sea is at the global price. So it doesn't make the price go down in the UK.
He's saying we have more gas here that we should be taking more use of. He goes on to say ideology, wishful thinking, nostalgia and culture wars don't provide actual solutions.
If the previous government had done what this government is doing and had driven the switch to clean energy, so more wind, wave and solar power and more nuclear power, then we wouldn't be at the mercy of people like the Ayatollahs in Iran or Vladimir Putin in Russia. Now, the previous government didn't do that. We are doing it. And it's the right thing to do for the long-term security of our energy supply, but also keeping prices down and avoiding shocks when those places in the world that petrol and oil come from see incidents.
We could talk about this for a long time. Yeah. There's a live debate on this, but there's a few other things I do want to hit. So the government's promised people repeatedly £300 off their energy bills. And Ed Miliband told me last week that means an annual average bill of £1,450. I mean, given what's happening and with the projections that we're seeing, are you still sticking to that pledge, Mark, £300 off energy bills?
Despite what's happening, in April, households will see a cut of £150 in their energy bills.
That's a different question. I know that. The price cap lasts until May, but then after that, it's expected to go up. The government has repeatedly said you'll have £300 off energy bills. Ed Miliband confirmed to me last week that means the average annual bill of £1,450. That's not going to happen, is it?
Well, we have to keep an eye on the situation. I don't know, and nor does anybody, how long the situation in the Middle East will go on for. Perhaps it'll be a few days, perhaps it will be longer, but I don't think we need to always look at the worst case scenario. As things stand, people will get £150 off their energy bills in April, and that's locked in then for 3 months. Perhaps this situation will be resolved within that time, and that's what we all hope for. But if we want to plan for the long term and plan not to be subject to price increases if conflicts happen in places like the Middle East, then we need to shift away from dependence on fossil fuel towards clean energy, and that's precisely what the government is doing.
The reason that I'm talking about the promise you made on energy bills, look, it's not your fault what's happened. You know, you weren't involved in this action.
Yep.
But I think the point I guess I want to say is that you're promising things that you don't know if you can deliver. You don't know if people's bills can go down to £300 if global prices go. And if I could, Rachel Reeves' spring forecast last week, she pegged this government's fortunes to inflation coming down. This is not something that you can always control. Why do you keep promising things that you don't know you can deliver?
Well, as you say, we can't control all the events that may happen all the way across the world that will affect the country. What we can do is put ourselves in the best position possible to withstand those shocks. So by stabilising the economy, by being able to make the announcements that Rachel did in the spring statement about falling inflation, rising growth, wages rising, all of that puts the country in a better situation to withstand shocks of the kind we've seen in the Middle East and of the kind that we saw a few years ago in Ukraine when Russia invaded.
Donald Trump is still pretty furious, it's clear, with Keir Starmer for not backing him from the start. Is the relationship recoverable?
Of course it is. I mean, the relationship between the UK and the US is deep and it's abiding, and the leaders of the two countries don't always agree on absolutely everything. But there was a call last night, I understand, between the President and the Prime Minister. It was very constructive, as you would expect. And although the UK did not take part in the initial strikes, because we didn't see there was a legal basis for the UK to be involved at that stage, when Iran responded with reckless attacks on other countries in the Middle East, then as allies of those countries, we have come to their defence.
Tony Blair told a Jewish news event on Friday, I think we should have backed America from the very beginning. They were asking us to use our bases for refuelling. It's not like Vietnam. It's not like in Iraq.
Well, he's absolutely entitled to his view as well, but it will be the Prime Minister and the government that take decisions in the national interest.
What do you think he's right then, Tony Blair, or not?
No, I don't agree with him. I think we need to learn lessons from Iraq over 20 years ago now, but there was a big inquest into that. There are lessons to be learnt. It is our government that will take decisions about what is in the British national interest. And as I said earlier, we concluded there was not a legal basis for the UK to be involved in the initial strikes, but we have jets in the air right now acting in defence of our allies in the region because of the reckless way that Iran has responded.
Ed Davey is calling for the King to cancel his planned trip to the States. Do you think that's a good idea?
Well, I don't think it's for Ed Davey. I think it's for the King and the Palace to take decisions like that, and I don't think it's for me to comment on that either. OK, thank you very much indeed. Steve Reed speaking to us there. Coming up, we're going to have lots more on the unfolding situation in the Middle East with the former Middle East Minister, Alistair Byrne.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News presenter?
We've done the work and the reading, so you don't have to.
Being a Sky News presenter.
Hello and welcome. Westminster, the heart of British politics. I'm so sorry about what happened to you. So what on earth is going on?
It's not true.
Can I tell you what I think is really unusual? Mornings with Richard and Frost. Let's crack on. Let's get started.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News journalist?
Who's funnier?
Being a Sky News journalist.
A special edition of The World with me, Yalda Hakim.
Pakistan has the right to respond.
You're like, what?
A historic day here today.
Congratulations, this is a huge moment.
But what happens now?
Welcome back. Thanks for joining us this morning. Let's continue our ongoing coverage of the situation in the Middle East. Delighted to say that Sally Lockwood joins us now from Dubai. Sally, earlier we were talking about the scale of action over the weekend by both sides and the fact that there's no de-escalation in sight. One extra development over the weekend was desalination plants being hit. Talk us through how important those are there and the extent to which it's been seen as a major escalation.
Yeah, good morning to you both. Certainly, this is one of the most water-scarce parts of the world, and the Gulf is hugely dependent on desalination plants for their drinking water. The UAE gets around 42% of their water from these plants, but that climbs to as high as 90% for the likes of Kuwait. You might be able to hear the fast jets flying overhead at the moment. We've had a few air defence bangs this morning already, so I'll keep an ear out for those. But there's also been a missile alert already this morning in Abu Dhabi. But let's just get back to the issue of desalination plants. You know, it's not just military targets that are being hit here in the Gulf. Civilian areas have really come under a lot of threat and targeting as well. We've had residential areas hit in Dubai over the weekend, as well as the international airport here. But in Bahrain, yesterday, the first desalination plant in the Gulf was hit in this war, and it's caused a lot of concern. Tehran hasn't responded yet to that announcement by Bahraini officials. But there was also a report, or multiple reports in Israeli media yesterday, that the UAE had struck a desalination plant in Iran. Now, the UAE came out very quickly to deny that this had happened, but this was of great concern for two reasons, Wilf. One is that Gulf nations are resisting getting involved militarily for fear of escalation, that they could become even more of a target in this war than they are already, but also, of course, because of the fear of reprisal attacks against their desalination plants, of which there are many. This is a really big deal for these countries. Water is extremely scarce here, and if we do indeed see this sort of escalation where Iran starts to attack this critical domestic infrastructure like water, that could lead to real problems here in Gulf states. So that's something that no one wants to see happen, but it's certainly a development that happened yesterday that we're keeping a very close eye on here.
Sally, great stuff. Thanks so much for that. Sally Lockwood there for us in Dubai. Let's continue the discussion now with Alistair Burt, who's the former Minister of State for the Middle East and joins us now. Very good morning to you. Alistair, I guess the first headline question, both based on those attacks on desalination plants that Sally was just referencing, but in general, the actions and rhetoric of the weekend, do you see any de-escalation in sight?
No. And I think it was always one of the major fears of the consequences of military action would be that it would quickly run out of control. Once the first shot is fired in a war, you don't quite know what's going to happen next. But the fears always included lashing out by Iran in all directions at those that they felt might either have some influence to bring the conflict to an end or just in revenge for what they were fearing. And the consequence of there being no clear plan for what is to happen, change priorities by the United States on a regular basis, this is what's leading to this escalation, I'm sure, and we probably haven't seen the end of it yet. There is a limit to how much ordnance Iran must possess, But nonetheless, there's still much damage capable of being done, as Sally rightly says.
Do you think that Keir Starmer's approach to this has been broadly on point? Has he made any errors? What's your assessment?
Well, I'm one of those who does believe that the Prime Minister has got it broadly right. I don't think that this was a conflict which needed to be started at this particular time. There were negotiations going on. Negotiations with Iran had been successful in the past. The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action in 2015 severely limited its nuclear capacity. The United States broke that some years ago. The negotiations could have continued, so we needn't have been in this. The Prime Minister had the lessons of the past to go on. I think he was correct. But once targets, which included UK citizens, UK bases and personnel, once they became obvious after Iranian attacks, then equally the Prime Minister was right to make sure that everything that could be done to defend those assets was being done, and to signal to our many friends in the Gulf who had counselled caution against an attack on Iran for some considerable time that we were trying to stand by them and doing everything we could to help them. It's a very difficult situation for the British government, but at the moment, I think they've made the right choices.
I'm sure you've seen the headline coming from Yalda's interview with the Qatari Prime Minister that they feel betrayed to be included as targets in Iran's retaliation. Do you think relationships across the Middle East have been changed forever by the scale of Iran's retaliation, or not?
Forever is a long time, but if, Wilfred, you mean sort of in the near and foreseeable future, oh, absolutely. People had known that this situation was brewing for some time. There is no excuse for the Tehran regime's conduct, either in the region or against its own people. The issue became how to deal with that. For some years, recent years, the Gulf states had been trying to descale tensions, reopening their own relationships with Iran, notably Saudi Arabia and Iran, came to a diplomatic agreement that was brokered by the Iraqis and then sealed in China. Because they knew the consequences of a conflict. I saw one estimate some years ago that said the first day of a conflict in the region would cost $1 trillion in lost revenue and the like. And the Gulf states feel very vulnerable for the future. So yes, their relationships will be affected with all involved. They counselled caution to the United States and Israel. That wasn't listened to. They didn't want a retaliation or revenge from the Iranians. That has happened. The Gulf is an incredibly stable and good place for business, for tourism, and for many other things. And of course, crucial for our energy supplies. It's essential it gets back to that as quickly as possible. It is a safe place, or always has been. It will want to recover that reputation quickly. But relationships with Iran, this will all depend on how it ends. And of course, that is the great question that General David Petraeus always asked about military action. Tell me how this ends, to which at present there is no answer.
Finally, Alistair, does this, with the oil price spike that we've seen, help Russia, and does it hurt China?
You could certainly argue that the big winners at the moment are indeed Russia. The attention is taken off Ukraine. The United States press secretary made another disparaging remark about Ukraine last week and all the assets that have been sent to Ukraine, which the US describes as a waste, but which the United Kingdom and others saw as essential for Ukraine's independent survival. Russian oil is going to be released in order to counter the limitation of supplies. So Russia will gain from that. All the pressure is off. And as far as taking action that is unsanctioned by law is concerned, which was the situation in relation to the invasion of Ukraine, well, we've just seen that in terms of Iran and the attacks on Iran. So Russia gets a pass here. Equally, there was a report the other day that Russia had been passing information to Iran about the location of US assets. This was brushed away, both by the president and the press secretary, and people wondered, well, why? So Russia at the moment stands as a winner out of all this, which is tragic because the losers are the Iranian people and all those caught up in the conflict.
Alistair Burt, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, we talked an awful lot in the last week about the UK's military role in the Middle East, but there are also serious questions about whether we're able to sustain a prolonged conflict in the first place.
The author of the government's defence review has told our security and defence editor Deborah Haynes that the UK needs to urgently accelerate plans to spend more on our armed forces or risk being vulnerable to attack. Here's her report.
British fighter jets defending the skies above Cyprus and across the Middle East as Donald Trump's war with Iran rages. Here, a suspected Iranian drone is destroyed by an F-35 jet, while the Royal Navy is preparing finally to deploy this Type 45 destroyer with the ability to take down ballistic missiles. It may also send an aircraft carrier. An impressive show of force. But the reality is a lot less reassuring. Put bluntly, the UK military has too few troops, ships, jets, guns and, crucially, ammunition to sustain a major fight for very long. Insiders working at the Ministry of Defence tell me the sorry state of the armed forces is the brutal reality of the impact of decisions by successive governments over decades to spend more on peacetime priorities and less on defence. Even now, with war in the Middle East and Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, there's been no decisive shift to put Britain back onto more of a wartime footing. Instead, there's a widening gap between the rhetoric you hear from ministers about how they're rebuilding the Army, Navy and the Air Force and the reality on the ground. To give a sense of what's been lost, we've tracked how the military has shrunk since the Cold War. These figures don't include reservists, but if the UK were to be drawn into a prolonged conflict today, it would only have around 125,000 full-time forces, comprising almost 26,000 in the Navy, 70,000 in the Army, and 27,500 in the RAF. By contrast, in 2003, when the UK joined the US in invading Iraq, it had just over 200,000 service personnel, with 42,000 in the Navy, 112,000 in the Army, and 53,000 in the RAF. Going back even further to 1983, during the Cold War, there were 321,000 regular members of the armed forces, split between 72,000 in the Navy, 159,000 in the Army, and 90,000 in the Air Force. The defence budget, as a proportion of GDP, has shrunk as well, with Britain spending 5% on the military in 1983, compared with just 2.5% in 2003 and 2.3% now.
Kia, nice to see you. Thanks for your time.
The Prime Minister has vowed to reverse the slide and invest in new technologies, but there's still no clarity on how plans set out in a major defence review published last year will be funded, or if it will be delivered faster than a lengthy timeframe of 2035.
As a country, we are short of cash, and there's some very difficult choices to make about how you find more money for defence. And our view was the government would have to find more money sooner. And what I would say is the world, since the review was published by the government, has just got more difficult. So the urgency is greater and the vulnerability is absolutely no less.
With Britain's sovereign bases in Cyprus already in the firing line, though, the armed forces are having to fight Iran's missiles and drones with what they've got and hope it's enough. Deborah Haynes, Sky News.
Sobering stuff there from Deborah. Deborah's going to join us later in the programme. We'll discuss her report in more detail. For now, though, we're going to have a quick look at the weather.
Dinner under the stars tonight?
That reminds me of our travel insurance.
You mean All Clear Skies?
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors Sky News weather.
It's looking mainly dry, calm and gloomy again today, but it'll turn more unsettled later tomorrow. It's mostly mild, but there's extensive low cloud bringing fog to the hills and a little patchy rain and drizzle, mainly over western Britain and southern Irish coasts. The morning won't bring much change, although there's a greater chance of brighter spells developing, especially over eastern Britain and the west of Ireland. It'll be very mild with mainly light winds. The afternoon will stay mostly dry, with brighter spells becoming more extensive, but England and Wales will see showery outbreaks developing more widely.
All Clear Travel Insurance proudly sponsors Sky News Weather.
Coming up, we're going to be talking to the Iranian filmmaker Vahid Khoshrowshahi about what is happening right now in the Middle East.
I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
We'd been warned that we would meet people in the lowest moment of their lives.
Their story is one of fundamental American failure. Well, a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club, but I have to say there are more media here than there are supporters.
We love Trump!
I've witnessed the remarkable passion for politics here, but the anger too. This is just the audience that Joe Biden wanted.
Is this the moment to reform gun laws?
You know, it's easy to go to politics.
But it's important, it's at the heart of the issue.
For all the talk of a toned-down, humbled Trump, yes, maybe there was just a little less rhetoric, a little less divisiveness, but in the end it was the same rhythm, the same speech, the same man.
All them people that died in Russia and Ukraine, they'd still be alive today if Donald Trump was the president.
If it was my wish, have a businessman that's strong like Trump, but maybe just doesn't say as much, you know?
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What we've been allowed to see over here is a humanitarian corridor. Free wherever you get your news.
A young American medical student is making remarkable things happen.
I've seen a lot of difficult things, and honestly, it breaks my heart. These children don't deserve that.
I don't think there's a single Arab I know who isn't seriously disturbed by what's going on.
And so they gathered for this wonder of nature.
I'm very excited right now.
This is an extraordinary moment beyond anything I could have expected. Sky News, get the full story first.
Well, hello and thank you for watching. Tonight on The Wrap, we will be joined by the very best commentators to explain the how and the why. He did know what he was doing. Both agree on that, can we?
No.
No. Can expect more analysis.
This is going to get deeper. I think it's going to end up with Russia.
Is war inevitable? What he's interested in is a deal.
That doesn't rule out strikes.
I disagree. And laughs along the way.
You're cheap.
Plus, a look at tomorrow's headlines. The Wrap. Everything wrapped up for you from 10.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist?
They call him the king of the jungle.
Being a Sky News journalist.
Yusra al-Baghir has this report.
And this is what's left of it.
As a woman of colour, how did the Harris campaign speak to you? People risk their lives to speak to us for this report.
Mr. Zuma, Sky News.
We're trying to see as much as we can.
Welcome back. For 6 years, documentary filmmaker Vahid Khoshrowshahi has followed Iranian artists who left Iran because of censorship and political constraint. This year, he returned home during the protests in January to visit his sick father and filmed his experiences, speaking to others inside Iran who took part in the film at great personal risk. Here's a taste of his documentary, Butterflies.
Baba? Baba? خوابیدی؟
نه وحید بیدارم.
نه چی گفتم یکم حرف بزنیم.
ثبت برای چی آوردی؟
همینجوری وقت دیگه.
نکنه میخوای صدای من ضبط کنی؟
واسه یادگاری حالا صداتم ضبط کنم چی میشه مگه؟
نکنه میخوای بری برگردی؟
نه بابا این چه حرفیه؟
پس برای چه صدا من ضبط میکنی؟ این کارا یعنی داری میری برای همیشه؟
Oh, it's great to see some of the documentary, which we'd love to talk to you a bit about as well. But I guess I was quite keen to start off about what you experienced when you were in Iran so recently.
I went back home in January this year to see my seriously ill father because I thought that might be my last chance, as well as meeting the production team because we were working together fully remotely, and to finish the documentary But I found myself in the middle of Iran's most recent protests and decided to join them. So for me to see the courage and the solidarity, to see how Iranians are supporting together was very powerful, and I really was, I would say I was so lucky to be part of it as well as helping and joining them.
Have you been in touch over the last week since the war started with people there?
I received a phone call on day one of the war, and then since then not, because it's very difficult to call. But I received a phone call last night from a friend. It was a very quick conversation, but when I asked him how you guys feel, how is it going over there, and he said we're fine. And I asked him, can you not leave Tehran and go somewhere else, just to stay a bit, somewhere that is a bit more safe? The message was very touching when he replied me and said, no, we're not going anywhere. We're not leaving our home. We're not leaving Tehran. We're staying here. We're waiting to be our turn again. So the feeling of the people and the clear message, what do they really want, which is, a freedom, a dignity, is very powerful.
It really is, isn't it?
So do they, I guess the question I would have is, did they support the initial action from the US? And I think the follow-up would be 10 days on, are they still positive about it, or are they worried about where it's going to head with the appointment of the new Ayatollah, for example? I think
the people in Iran came out in January, clearly called for freedom, and made it very, very clear that this regime doesn't work anymore. They need to go. That was a clear message. And what is happening now? From the people I've been in contact, they don't see it as a war. They more see it as an opportunity, as a chance to come out of this misery. I know war is not good, for everywhere, but we have to remember in January 2026, they killed 46,000 people in 1 week. Majority of them were killed in two days. So the people, Iranian people in Iran, do not want this government anymore, this regime anymore.
Can I just take you back to when you joined the protest? Because you said it very casually, but it is kind of an extraordinary thing to have done, because, as you said, thousands of people being killed, being murdered for taking to the streets. Were you afraid? What did you see?
Well, of course there is a fear. When you understand the potential consequences, you can't really, you can't say I'm not scared. Yeah, there was a fear, but there was a big hope as well. I remember I've got like a 35-minute film recorded when I was home in one of the nights that we were planning who should go out and who should stay. So those conversations, trying to convince each other that, okay, tonight I'm going out, you stay and protect the family, let me go, it's my turn. People are supporting each other. They want to go out. They want to come out of this. They have 47 years. They had enough, and they just want to end.
And did you see, like, the regime there policing?
Oh, yeah, of course. They shoot at you directly. They don't...
So you saw the people with guns being... Did you see people being shot around you?
Yeah, they were shooting and we were running away. One of the things that I felt, which was very poetic in my view, was something that I call that open doors. By that I mean, in Iran, in those nights in January when we were out calling for freedom, there were some other people who didn't want it to come out for any reason. But what they used to do was to leave the doors open, the garage and the parking doors open for us or for other young people who are running away from the gunshot to find a shelter and hide.
Wow, it's crazy to hear all of that. And obviously a huge part of this is captured in your new documentary, Butterflies. Forgive me for asking again on the recent news, but are you disheartened by the selection of the new Ayatollah? Does it make you worry that all of this will be futile?
I think this is not the selection by Iranian people. We've got Iran, we've got regime. These are two different things. The new leader is for the regime, it's not for the Iranian people. Iranian people have clearly said who they want. They're calling just one name, which is Reza Pahlavi, and it's coming out of Iran and outside of Iran. So if we, as Iranians, have selected who we really want as a leader, regime leaders, we don't want them. We don't want them to lead our country anymore.
So I guess do you think this is all still worthwhile? I mean, we're talking about energy prices here, which obviously seems very small fry compared to your people's concerns. But are you hopeful this will end well?
Well, we live in a big hope, and we took our side, and we are quite happy with what's going on, with the help of the US intervening to help us. Yeah, we have a big hope for a change.
Well, Vahid, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
We really appreciate it. Really amazing to get your take, and hope all those people you've been speaking to stay safe.
Thank you. Thanks, sir.
We've got 30 seconds or so left in the programme. Just a reminder, we're going to be watching very closely at the top of the hour the open of UK markets, the FTSE 100, but in particular UK borrowing markets, the bond markets. And as we sit here now, oil prices are at $108 a barrel. They're up 16% overnight. That's actually pared back some of the gains. When we came in this morning, they were up even more sharply than that at $108 a barrel.
Yeah, and of course, we're going to be asking all those questions about what it means for people at home, for bills and the cost of living going forward as well. We'll be bringing you the very latest on the conflict in Iran as it spills across the region in just a few moments' time.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist?
I'm going to take you behind the scenes here for Election Night Live. They have gone up and up.
Being a Sky News journalist.
Ed Conway. Sky News, is anyone going to talk to us? Mortgage rates did go up very sharply during your time in office. Here it is.
First off, just the scale of what we're looking at.
Our data shows it's been happening. Question is, why it hasn't been stopped.
Good morning, it is 8 o'clock and welcome to Mornings with Bridge and Frost.
With Sophy and Wilfred, a very good morning from me as well. Lots ahead.
The price of oil skyrockets, sending Asian markets plummeting as the impact of war in Iran begins to spread much further than the Middle East.
In an exclusive interview with Sky News, Qatar's Prime Minister tells us he feels a deep sense of betrayal from Iran's attacks on his country.
This miscalculation by the Iranians to attack the Gulf countries has destroyed everything.
We'll discuss what to expect in the coming days as Iran's new supreme leader is announced.
Plus, a huge fire engulfs Glasgow Central Station after starting in a nearby vape shop. There'll be travel disruption today as a result.
Good morning. Welcome to the programme. Well, since the war in the Middle East began just over a week ago, we've constantly been warned about the economic implications, and those fears are fast becoming a reality. There's been some staggering moves overnight, the price of oil going up more in the last 24 hours than in any other day in the last 6 years.
Let's put that all in context for you. And we came in overnight a few hours ago. Brent crude had surged to $114 a barrel, and it was up 25% overnight. A staggering move for any single trading day, or trading half night, frankly, as it was earlier this morning. It's since pared back a little bit, as you can see from this chart. We're at about $108 on Brent crude, and that relatively small pullback in the grand scheme of things came as it was announced that G7 finance ministers will speak at lunchtime and discuss releasing more oil supplies from strategic reserves. We'll see if that happens later. Either way, overnight, we're up massively. We're still up about 15%. We're still well above $100 for Brent crude. And it's worth just noting how much we've risen so far this year. Already last week, we rose 35%. And even before this war broke out, in January and February, we were up 25% on the possibility of Middle East action before it in fact happened. All of this means, Sophie, that we're up almost 100% since the start of the year. And I just want to remind people what the former Chancellor Jeremy Hunt told us last week. The rule of thumb that Treasury goes by is a 10% increase in the price of oil might reduce GDP by 0.1%. So roughly 100% increase could reduce GDP by a full percentage point if these prices do persist. Let's just put this scale of increase in perspective over a 6-year chart, because that, of course, allows us to introduce two moments in time. COVID, when we thought that nobody was going to travel anymore, that was the scale of decline. Russia's invasion of Ukraine, that was the scale of increase. You can see really the increase we're looking at in oil prices at the moment, really incredibly stark. We're talking about the same scale as those recent moments in the last 6 years. The big question, of course, is does it persist? If it persists for as long as the Ukraine invasion, we're in real trouble. If it pulls back from here, maybe you won't feel it so much. Let's have a look at how this has led to the FTSE 100 that's opened just moments ago. We've got a live chart of the FTSE so far this morning, down 1.2%. So not that big a move, you might say, in the FTSE 100. Some of the Asian markets were down more than that. These aren't live for these European bourses, I don't think. They're not open. 10-year gilt chart, we said this last hour. To what extent is this pushing up borrowing costs? Well, actually, there'll be a little bit of a sigh of relief from the Chancellor this morning. This has not been updated so far today. So this was the increase we saw last week, which was quite significant for a one-week move. We went from about 4.35% for the 10-year borrowing costs to about 4.7%. As you can see, about 6 months ago, we were higher at 4.8%, but the rise, the direction of travel quite sharp. Well, this morning, the UK 10-year gilt yield has opened up at 4.76%. So we'd be talking about a little further jump to about here. So still a move that we need to see change direction and not keep going like that. But the jump today, Sophie, in the 10-year borrowing cost, relatively small when you talk about the jump in oil prices, which was as big as we've seen for a single day ever.
Yeah, and of course, oil prices means, cost of living, it means inflation, it means petrol prices at the pumps, but it also potentially means energy bills later on this year. The kind of thing that, really makes a difference for people in the UK, but as Wilf was just explaining as well, across the world as well. I was asking Steve Reed about that, the Minister, when he was on the programme this morning, and whether or not the government was going to hit its promise to actually reduce people's energy bills.
As things stand, people will get £150 off their energy bills in April, and that's locked in then for 3 months. Perhaps this situation will be resolved within that time, and that's what we all hope for. But if we want to plan for the long term and plan not to be subject to price increases if conflicts happen in places like the Middle East, then we need to shift away from dependence on fossil fuel towards clean energy, and that's precisely what the government is doing.
The reason that I'm talking about the promise you made on energy bills, look, it's not your fault what's happened. You weren't involved in this action.
Yep.
But I think the point I guess I want to say is that you're promising things that you don't know if you can deliver. You don't know if people's bills can go down £300 if global prices go. And if I could, Rachel Reese's spring forecast last week, she pegged this government's fortunes to inflation coming down. This is not something that you can always control. Why do you keep promising things that you don't know you can deliver?
Well, as you say, we can't control all the events that may happen all the way across the world that will affect the country. What we can do is put ourselves in the best position possible to withstand those shocks.
Steve Reed there earlier on today. Certainly going to be pressure for the government on almost anything that they want to do if the finances tighten up. Let's go now to Qatar, because the Prime Minister of Qatar has made an urgent plea for all sides to de-escalate, telling Yada Hakim exclusively that Iran has made a dangerous miscalculation in attacking Gulf countries. Here is a taste of what he had to say to Yada.
You have always tried to maintain diplomatic relations with Iran. Certainly Qatar has, and they've tried in many ways to maintain those relationships despite Iran facing global isolation. Do you feel betrayed?
Well, of course, it is a big sense of betrayal. This is the second time. That's why it's also for us, it's been something really significant to see the attack, which was showing that being pre-planned. Once the war started, just maybe an hour after the start of the war, Qatar and the other Gulf countries being attacked right away. And all of us, before this war and repeatedly, we've been saying and repeating that we are not going to take part of any attacks or any wars against our neighbors. We would like to see a peaceful neighborhood. We were helping Iran and the United States in reaching diplomatic solutions. But this miscalculation by the Iranians to attack the Gulf countries has destroyed everything. Our countries don't want to be part of this war, and we would like to see them stopping right away.
As you say, a disaster for the world. It's not just about the region.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, we have seen what are the cascading effects of this escalation, and we are just a week from this conflict. And it's we need to ensure first that Iran should stop all the attacks against the Gulf countries and the other countries that they are attacking, and they are not party of this war. We need to seek a way to de-escalate the situation and to find a diplomatic solution whenever it's possible.
Much has been made about the UK and Europe's response or the lack of. What's your take on how they have reacted to this conflict?
Well, honestly, from our perspective, all our European partners has been providing us with significant support, whether it's politically, whether it's in any of the supply chain issues that we have. United Kingdom has provided an outstanding support for Qatar. We have the joint squadron working together with our pilots, and we are very grateful for this partnership and for this alliance. I don't know why they say that Europe doesn't do anything, maybe on the general level, but on the level of bilateral relationship with us and with other GCC partners, we have seen them demonstrating a great friendship.
Well, Yalda joins us live now from Doha. Yalda, crazy stuff to think that we'd hear the Qatari PM said they felt betrayed. Do you think this is for good, that their relationships have changed, or is it temporary?
You know, the relationship, Wilf, certainly feels like it's strained. You know, the Qatari Prime Minister, Qatar itself, has always liked to position itself as a country that can talk to everyone. So right now they're talking still to the Iranians. They have those channels open. They're talking to the Americans. They're the few places on the planet which view themselves as a bridge, as mediators to major conflicts. And this is a man who has negotiated some of the most complex crises on the planet. And yet you could see how visibly angry he is today, because he's saying, what have we got to do with this conflict? You aren't hitting just military facilities, installations and bases. You are going after airports in the Gulf. You're going after our energy infrastructure. You're going after civilian infrastructure. Just in the last 24 hours, the Saudis have reported that a residential area was hit and a civilian was killed in this conflict. So it just makes you realize that this conflict has dragged them in. They're furious about it. But I don't believe, Wilf, that the Qataris believe that this relationship is dead. It certainly has changed the dynamics, especially when you hear the Qatari Prime Minister say this was all pre-planned, that they were going to hit us regardless, despite our efforts. And the Qatari Prime Minister has been, frankly, since the 12-day war last year in June, discussing with the Americans, going back to the Iranians, trying to play this, middleman role to de-escalate the situation, even during the negotiations, the lead up to this conflict, those nuclear negotiations. He had the channels open with the Iranians, talking to the Americans all the time. So they're deeply strained, but I don't think that they're damaged for good.
And Yada, in terms of your overall takeaways of what's happened this weekend, you know, whether it's Iranian oil storage hit in Iran, whether it's desalination plants hit across the region, clearly it's not pointing to de-escalation. To what extent is the base case now significant escalation from here?
Yeah, you just heard the Qatari Prime Minister talking about the importance of de-escalation throughout the interview. He kept reiterating that this isn't just a regional conflict that will impact the region. This will have global implications. So when energy infrastructure is hit or the production of fertilization is impacted here in Qatar, he talked about gas production stopping here, LNG stopping here, and that's 20% of the world's supply that they provide. So he was talking about global implications. So when he calls for de-escalation, and yet we hear and see desalination plants hit, we hear and see oil refineries hit, there isn't a sense from either side, whether it's the Americans and the Israelis or the Iranians, that they're somehow de-escalating the situation. And the rhetoric and the language is going up from both sides. At the weekend, President Trump talked about total surrender from the Iranian side. The Iranians said that they can fight for 6 more months. They have all the time in the world. So it very much feels like a contest of will. And certainly at this point in time, it does feel like the Iranians have all the time in the world, and the Americans are struggling to lay out what their objectives are. So while the Qataris are talking about de-escalation, coming back to the negotiating table, coming back to diplomacy, from both sides, we are seeing the rhetoric ramping up, and certainly the number of munitions that are being dropped on Iran right now is several thousand, just 10 days into this conflict.
Yalda, thank you very much indeed. We're 10 days into the conflict now, and Iran has a new supreme leader, but frankly, you'd be forgiven for feeling like not much has changed. So those were some of the Iranian state TV footage that was released by the regime, and it shows supporters celebrating the appointment of Mojtaba Khamenei. He's the son of the old leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who, of course, was killed in that airstrike by the US and Israel.
Let's bring in Diana, who's in Jerusalem for us. Diana, what stands out for you about this man, this appointment, and what it means going forward?
I think it means, Wilf, that he'll be even more hardline than his father was, if he's able to be, given the fact that the sort of military and security situation in Iran after 10 days of this conflict is perhaps more dispersed and a lot more complicated, and he is under considerable pressure, which, as a man who's really played a very behind-the-scenes role until now, it will be interesting to see how he sort of rises to this challenge in any kind of public capacity, or if he still remains very much behind the scenes. He's going to have to remain in hiding, frankly, because he is a wanted man. Israel and the United States have said that they will get him. The President of the United States said that the choice of Mojtaba Khamenei would be unacceptable to him, and Israel has said, you know, we will hunt you down. They released a video saying, like father, like son, a few days ago about him. Now, Mojtaba Khamenei has been a very known figure. He cut his teeth fighting in the Iran-Iraq war with a sort of celebrated battalion where he made deep connections with the Revolutionary Guard and with the volunteer forces who were fighting there, who evolved into the Basij. He was sanctioned by the United States in 2019 because of the backseat role he played in both promoting the axis of resistance abroad through the Revolutionary Guard's Quds force, and for his role in the oppression of domestic dissent, because he's been very involved for the last 20 years, really, in crushing every single protest cycle that we have seen. So I think if you had hoped that Iran's clerical body, who oversees the choice of the next supreme leader, might have tried to make a nod towards somebody more moderate, more pragmatic, even more religious, because although he studied in a seminary, he's very much a mid-level cleric, then that is certainly not the case. But I think this decision was anticipated, that he would be appointed. We shall have to see if he really takes on much of a public profile. And I think interesting also in relation to the interview that you've just played that Yalda did with the Qatari Prime Minister, you know, he was fighting as a teenager in the Iran-Iraq war when the Gulf countries were his enemy, basically. The Gulf Cooperation Council was formed at the beginning of the 80s to try and form a united front against the threat from Iran. And therefore, I think that that vision that the hard line, the militant clerics, the Revolutionary Guard in Iran have of the fact that these Gulf countries are hosts to US military bases sits, you know, with a lot of rancour for him. And I therefore think that if we hope that Pezeshkian, the president, was suggesting that they might move away from that posture of targeting the Gulf states, well, certainly with Mojtaba Khamenei in charge, that will not be the case.
Diana, great stuff. Thanks so much, Diana, there in Jerusalem. We'll be back out, of course, in the region throughout the morning. But a lot of course, relevant developments for the UK as well, and the Prime Minister, because on Truth Social, the US President, Donald Trump, called the UK a once great ally and once again called out Keir Starmer for his lack of initial support during the early days of the US-Israeli attacks on Iran.
And really, that's the least of the government's worries, given the spikes in energy prices. Later this morning, the Prime Minister is going to be talking to businesses about how the government's trying to protect the UK from the impact of the conflict. Let's bring in Alex Rogers, shall we, our political correspondent. So firstly, on Trump, do you think it's recoverable?
Perhaps, but it really does look like it's at its lowest ebb there's been so far. Every time we seem to be sort of bringing Trump back on side or like de-escalating the situation, all he has to do is go and issue another broadside of once a great ally. He's Keir Starmer's no Winston Churchill, I think he said earlier in the week. So I think there just is a real clear ideological divide here between Keir Starmer, who's always erring on the side of caution, and Donald Trump, who hasn't forgotten our initial decision not to join in the strikes and not to allow the US access to our bases. And even though we've U-turned on that, he's not forgotten our initial response. That's the thing that's stuck in his mind.
Although if there's one person that's got form with changing his mind, I guess it's President Trump. So we'll see if the position softens, albeit clearly it hasn't done yet, going forward. Alex, to Sophie's point about the cost of living going forward, it really was how the Prime Minister started the year. He wanted it to be everyone's focus, try and direct our attention to the data, which was due to improve. It was improving on the inflation front. That's out of the window.
Yeah, I mean, it's been his central mission, really. I think he and the rest of the Labour government know that they can't win the next election if they don't solve the cost of living crisis. But obviously, this war just blows everything apart. The spring statement, only just last week, the spring forecast, felt like everything there is sort of preliminary almost. It could be torn apart at any moment by this war. And if oil prices go up, you know, there's also calls for the cancellation of the fuel duty rise to be cancelled because of the effect it could have on people's pockets here.
Yeah, we're hoping to hear a bit more from Keir Starmer throughout the programme a bit later on when he does make that speech. And, of course, we'll be keeping an eye on all the markets as well.
Let's chat about all of this in more detail and speak now to Sheikh Nawaf bin Mubarak Al Thani from Qatar. He's the founder and president of the Council on International Mediation. He's the former Qatari defence attaché to the United States during President Trump's first term. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Al Thani. It's really fantastic to have you with us today. I guess my first question, you obviously dealt with President Trump directly on topics that are relevant once again. Do you read him as being totally committed to continuing and doubling down on his current strategy? Or might there be some off-ramp or de-escalation that could emerge this week?
Good morning, Wilfred. Thank you for having me. What we can see here, what I can see at least personally, is that President Trump is at every stage setting a target that he wants to meet as an off-ramp. The issue being that target seems to be moving. And not understanding what is the end state of this war, let alone the issue of starting the war to begin with, is obviously going to have issues with the markets, with security for us in the region, and obviously globally for the economy.
How weak do you think Iran is right now? And could an end be in sight, perhaps closer than the market reaction would suggest, by Israel and the US continuing their current plan of attacks?
Well, the question of how weak it is, it's relative, to be honest. Is Iran still attacking the Gulf states? Yes. I mean, just this morning here in Qatar, we were awakened by the sound of the air defenses intercepting another Iranian attack just a few hours ago, and we're still in the morning. The rest of the Gulf states had the same problem, energy facilities being hit and so on and so forth. So that is relative to the security and obviously the price of oil. Whether the Iranians are weaker or not, that does not have an immediate, at least, effect on the situation on the ground today.
As no doubt you saw, your Prime Minister told Ayatollah Hakim overnight that Qatar feels betrayed by Iran because it's been one of the targets of their retaliation. To see your Prime Minister say that publicly, on the record, does it hide real deep anger and a long-lasting change of opinion from Qatar and regional neighbours towards Iran?
I think it makes it very clear the disappointment and the sheer shock that Qatar, Oman, and the rest of the Gulf, but specifically Qatar and Oman, because we've tried to help de-escalate, not being part of this current operation, I mean, notwithstanding everything the Iranians have been saying, and then to be attacked, our civilian infrastructure to be attacked. Our airports have been targeted, but thankfully, and but for the grace of God and our armed forces, those attacks have been thwarted. But it doesn't take a lot of imagination to see how those things could have been even worse, and it may still be. So I think that speaks to an honest view of disappointment and shock to the position that Qatar feels towards that betrayal. And I think that was a very, kind of precise and apt description of the situation that we feel here in Qatar.
Gauge for me the scale of disappointment or anger towards the United States.
Well, I think obviously being on the receiving end of the Iranian attack right now, most people here in Qatar are focused on being attacked by Iran. I think it is more confusion with the United States than anger. Confusion about, well, the reasoning of the war to begin with, but that's already done and, we're already in the war. But I think confusion about what the end state will be. Again, that moving goalpost of what is achievable and what can't be achieved and what would be viewed as an off-ramp. That is unclear to me. That is unclear to many who have studied and worked in this region for decades, especially in the defense and security arena. And that is worrying, to be honest.
Gauge for me the scale of increase we've seen in oil and gas prices thus far. If the scale of conflict we've seen during the first 10 days persists for another 10 days, do you think, in fact, the reaction in energy markets is underpricing the risk as things stand, or not?
Well, I think, Wilfred, that you've made it very clear even this morning earlier when you mentioned just with the UK, the GDP may shrink by 1%. This will, I think, just get worse. I can't see a situation if the straits remain closed or partially closed. I mean, more importantly, if the oil production states don't feel the confidence to produce and export LNG and oil, that will definitely have a cascading effect on several sectors of global economy, not just the energy sector. And just that domino effect, unfortunately, as you know, Wilfred, that even if the war ends tomorrow, you can't just put the brakes on the effects on the economy. So I think we're already in a bad situation. The question is, can we avoid getting in a much worse situation?
Thank you so much for joining us, Nawaf Al-Thani. Really great to have you with us this morning.
Thank you.
Reminder, Yalda's full special programme from Doha today at 1 p.m. More from her interview with the Prime Minister and obviously more team analysis led by Yalda on the ground there in the region. Can I just quickly mention before we get on to the next story, the calmness we saw in the UK bond markets at the open? Not so calm now, just to mention the 2-year yield, which really speaks to what we might expect the Bank of England to do, because it's talking about a shorter time horizon. It's now up to 4.24%. This time last week it was 3.5%.
What does that mean?
Massive increase.
What does it mean?
It means people aren't now just not expecting a rate cut, possibly even expecting a rate hike from the Bank of England in the next 12 to 24 months or so. So again, this time last week, or end of the prior week before the war broke out, the Bank of England base rate was at 3.75%, and most people expected at the March 19th meeting they'd cut again to 3.5%. That's why the 2-year bond yield was around 3.5% to match that. That surged 75 basis points. Most rate cuts are around 25 basis points, so 3 times that amount. We're now at 4.2%. So, all bets are off. Anything that was planned a couple of weeks ago, people's mortgages, the government finances, well, everything has changed. But to quite a big scale, this is quite a big move.
And this is borrowing. This basically means borrowing looks likely to be getting an awful lot more expensive because of the conflict we've seen in Iran. Let's bring it back to domestic matters, or other domestic matters, I should say, because a huge fire has forced Scotland's busiest railway station to close until further notice.
The fire broke out at a vape shop and engulfed a 4-storey B-listed Victorian building on Union Street, spreading close to Glasgow Central Station. Let's bring in Sadia, because Sadia, the pictures of this fire are quite astonishing, and the kick-on effects for travel in Glasgow is going to be significant.
Yeah, absolutely. You can see from those pictures just how much of that fire there was. This is a really iconic place. Anyone familiar with Glasgow will know Union Street. It is at the heart of the city, is a shopping district, has lots of famous spots in it, and that dome that you can see fully ablaze there, a really iconic part of the Glasgow skyline. And what we know is that this was a fire that started at a vape shop on the ground floor level. It is a 4-storey building, so you can see just how high that flame has gone. In terms of how big it was, this Scottish Fire and Rescue say that they were first alerted to this fire at 3:46 yesterday afternoon. These pictures are from just before midnight. This is from last night, and you can see the sky is dark and that fire is still very much raging. There are no reports of casualties, but this is a building that dates back to 1851 and it is partially collapsed. So no doubt lots of Glaswegians will be waking up this morning, with a sense of loss. And trains cancelled in and out of Glasgow Central Station. They have been since yesterday. It is expected to remain closed today, although some trains are passing through the station, just not stopping.
Yeah, it's such an iconic building, isn't it? Awful to see it up in flames like that.
Sadia there, great stuff, thank you. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll have more on the latest reaction to the Iran situation and the market reaction as well. We'll be talking to AJ Bell next.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News presenter?
We've done the work and the reading, so you don't have to. Being a Sky News presenter. Hello and welcome, Westminster, the heart of British politics. I'm so sorry about what happened to you. So what on earth is going on?
It's not true.
Can I tell you what I think? It's really unusual. Mornings with Ridge and Frost. Let's crack on. Let's get started.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News journalist?
Who's funnier?
Being a Sky News journalist. A special edition of The World with me, Yalda Hakim.
Pakistan had the right to respond.
You're like, what? Historic day here today. Congratulations, this is a huge moment. But what happens now?
Well, let's get more now, shall we, in the war in the Middle East. We can bring in our correspondent, Sally Lockwood, who is in Dubai for us. Sally, casualties, mounting, and obviously we've seen these awful numbers and detail coming out from Iran itself, including that attack on a school. We are seeing other casualties across the region too. Abu Dhabi saying that there have been 2 incidents of debris falling in 2 locations, which has led to some injuries. What more can you tell us?
Yeah, that was just this morning, Sophie. I told you in the last hour that we'd had a missile alert for Abu Dhabi this morning, and we'd heard the air defence blasts both in Abu Dhabi and here in Dubai. And news now that 2 civilians have been injured by falling debris, a Jordanian national and an Egyptian national this morning in Abu Dhabi. And even though the air defence systems are doing extraordinarily well here in the UAE, it is a reminder that it's still extremely dangerous, and we get those shelter-in-place warnings at least a couple of times a day at the moment. And this comes after the death of a Pakistani taxi driver on Saturday night here in the UAE. A number of residential areas of Dubai were hit by falling shrapnel debris after those missile interceptions. And both Abu Dhabi International Airport and Dubai International Airport have been hit. You know, this is not a war that is being limited to military targets. 2 people were killed in Saudi yesterday, 2 civilians. A drone attack in Bahrain injured 32 people, including children, who we understand, according to officials, now also need major surgery following that attack. And in a very worrying development, in the first incident of its kind in this war, a desalination plant is said to have been hit in Bahrain yesterday, according to officials there. Now, Tehran haven't yet responded to that, but there was also another claim in Israeli media yesterday that the UAE had hit a desalination plant in Iran, something that the UAE came out very quickly to deny. Now, desalination plants essentially turn seawater into usable drinking water. This area of the world, the Gulf, is very water scarce. They are heavily reliant on desalination plants. 42% of the UAE's water comes from those plants, and it climbs to as much as 90% for the likes of Kuwait. So these developments are extremely worrying. And of course, we've been talking a lot about the Strait of Hormuz, that very narrow waterway between here and Iran, which is effectively closed at the moment because it's just too risky for ships to pass. Well, that is really impacting the flow of crude oil, but it's also how a lot of food comes into this region. Gulf states import around 80 to 90% of their food. Now, while they do have stockpiles, closing that strait is going to impact food coming into this region. What they don't now want to see is this critical domestic infrastructure of desalination plants to become a target as well.
Sally, lovely stuff. Thanks so much for that, Sally, there in Dubai. Well, joining us here is Professor Michael Clark to discuss all of this much further. Michael, good morning to you. Just want to pick up on what Sally was touching on for us, first of all, because clearly when we look at reaction of markets, there's lots of factors at play, but one of them, I think, is the sort of hint that this is escalating, not de-escalating. Targeting things like desalination, is that a very clear sign of escalation?
Yes, it is. Reportedly, there was a hit on the Iranian desalination plant at Kazim Island, which is the little island on the tip of the Strait of Hormuz on their side. And they seem to have responded by hitting the desalination plant in Bahrain. And as Sally was saying there, desalination is critical to the Gulf states. They live on desalinated water. They have to. So that's a sign of increasing escalation. And it started a few days ago. Both sides have started to go for their oil infrastructures. And so Iranian oil infrastructure is being targeted, but not Hog Island, interestingly. Hog Island is the big, further up the Gulf, is the big offloading island. And although, offloading oil at Hog Island won't make any difference now because the Strait of Hormuz is closed, it can't go anywhere, but it would imply long-term damage to the oil industry. And that's what I think is spooking the markets. Last week, they were saying, look, this is disruptive. We're adjusting 20% increase in the price of oil. But you were talking about it earlier on. I mean, we've seen that's going through the ceiling now. And so Brent crude is up at 100 and something now, is it?
108.
108, right. So what's happening is that the markets are now getting used to the idea that this will go on for some time. It's not a blip. It's not a quick war. And that both sides... United States and Israel on one side, the Iranians on the other, are prepared to go quite quickly up the escalation ladder. So to start with, the escalation ladder looked like the Iranians saying, well, we'll extend it to the whole region. And then the next step on the escalation ladder is we'll extend it to energy. We'll really go after energy. And that's what both sides are now doing. And desalination is another example. If the idea is to actually wreck Iranian society, not just the leadership, and just to wreck the Iranian economy, if that's what it becomes, then the long-term damage to oil and gas markets and the long-term closure of the Strait of Hormuz has got to be something the markets will then start to price in, which looks as if it's what they're doing.
And I guess that could be a tactic from Iran as well, because, if they hit energy, that's somewhere they could really, really hurt the West.
That's right. And the leadership in Iran, remember, I mean, they're doing this for God. And so the damage to Iran as a country is secondary to them, to the survival of the regime, because, God wills the regime to survive. That's the way they see it. And, the appointment of Mojtaba as the supreme leader is an example exactly of that. This is more of the same. They're doubling down on their own survival.
I wanted to ask you, Michael, about the special relationship, because often we reflect on how it can be at its best.
Don't laugh.
When the two leaders are particularly close, Blair and Bush, Blair and Clinton, Reagan, Thatcher. Weirdly, when it gets tested to the downside, does it fall back on people in the military, people in the security services, such that there's a slight hope that even if the two people at the top really start to dislike each other, there's a flaw to how bad the relationship can get?
Yeah, there is. I mean, I think that the special relationship, as depicted in the British press, has been over for 40-odd years. I mean, just ages and ages
look at this.
Because
this is some brutal truth this morning.
I mean, everybody has a special relationship with the United States because it's the United States. Everyone's relationship with America is sensitive because it's America. But what we have is different. We have a specialist relationship with the US. I'd say we don't have a special relationship. We have a specialist relationship. So our intelligence works very closely with theirs, GCHQ at Cheltenham. They exchange material every day, literally every day, with the National Intelligence Agency in the United States. We parcel up the world as to which bits of the world to listen to, which bits of the world to shine the light on. I mean, GCHQ can shine a light on any part of the world it wants. It can't look at all the world all the time, but if it chooses to look at a bit of the world, it can shine a light straight onto it and hear telephone conversations, anything you like. And we do that on projects and exchange it. So the intelligence relationship is very close, as it is between, generally, the CIA and MI6, MI5 and FBI. Good relationship, not at the top particularly at the moment, but working relationships. And then there's the nuclear relationship. I mean, we get our nuclear, our weapons from the United States, the missiles. They're at Kings Bay in Georgia, and every now and again, one of our nuclear submarines go to Kings Bay, and we give them our 12 missiles, and they give us 12 more. And we develop our own warheads, and we talk to the US all the time about warhead design and so on. And then there's the military. The two militaries get on very well at a lower level. So all of that goes on day to day, lots of cooperation. But at the top level, the Americans, I mean, even Joe Biden, he ignored the British most of the time. He didn't inform the British what he was going to do in Afghanistan when he took a disastrous decision. Well, we're going to leave. No consultation with allies. The Americans always played tough. And the special relationship is a sort of sentimental thing that we hold on to that they've long since forgotten about. And they only talk about the special relationship when they want to beat us up.
Or they want us to do something.
Which they do. I mean, there's,
I guess
Trump he likes insulting his allies.
Puts the fallout in perspective, then.
Yeah. Well, I just think look, it's often said that the humorist, what was his name, Bill Nye, the American humorist, he famously said that Wagner's music is better than it sounds. And Trump's statements sometimes are better than they sound. They sound unhinged, but he knows what he's doing. There is a low cunning behind these unhinged statements he makes because he knows it winds us up. He knows he gets a reaction in the British press, and he knows that gives him credit to require something else of us. Yeah. So he kind of knows what he's doing in these unhinged statements.
We should stop talking about it.
Do you know who always said that to me as well? It's Mike Pence.
Oh, yeah?
Said, don't let him wind you up. Particularly us, he means journalists. He's like he's doing it on purpose.
There you go. What a special relationship.
Michael, great stuff. Thank you very much. Let's continue the discussion about the war and its impact and bring in now Russ Mould from AJ Bell to discuss the market impact. Russ, thanks so much for joining us. I've got a chart actually just to bring up and show you because there's lots of markets moving, but I wanted to start with the borrowing costs. This is the 2-year government bond yield. In the last week or so, it's gone from 3.5% to now 4.25%, suggesting, I guess, that there won't be any Bank of England rate cuts anytime soon, possibly even a hike.
Or if there are, they're going to be unwound very, very quickly, certainly within that 2-year time frame. I guess there are a number of calculations here. One is clearly concerns over the inflationary impact if oil and gas prices stay higher than markets think. And the current hope, for many reasons, is that this is over within a month, although it's looking a little bit more dangerous now. But if there is a sustained impact, then inflation goes up. That can have the knock-on effect upon interest rates. The other calculation is what does it do to the government's finances? We're already seeing South Korea talking about energy price caps and subsidies. The Indonesian currency's gone down because they already subsidised currencies and oil an awful lot, and now we're under pressure. So if the government puts its hand in its pocket, as it did 4 years ago, I think the Office for Budget Responsibility said that cost around £50 billion. Well, that would eliminate Chancellor Reeves's hard-earned headroom that she disclosed last week, about 28 billion, terribly quickly, and again, potentially, in a worst case, which we haven't got to yet, put the government's finances under pressure as well and maybe increase the borrowing cost that way.
Russ, we're looking at The FTSE 100 down 1.7%. Relative to some moves today, that's not that big.
No, Asia was worse. The big oil importers in Asia, India, Japan, Taiwan, Korea, they were down 2%, 3%, 4%, 6% at their worst. I mean, the FTSE 100 does have BP and Shell in it, two of the world's biggest oil and gas producers. They produce about 1/10 of the FTSE 100's profits on their own and pay out about 1/10 of its dividends on their own. So that does offer some degree of protection to the FTSE 100, but obviously not enough to stop it going down. And if you look at some of the fallers today, they're the really big energy-intensive, energy-consumptive industries, mining, engineering, airlines.
What's your assessment about where oil prices can go from here? If things persist for another few weeks as they are, is $108 the current price of Brent crude? Is that going to be too low?
Well, I mean, the all-time high in nominal terms, I think, is $147, which was 2007-8. And if you read the Financial Times, they've been inflation adjusting that. So the figure then is in inflation-adjusted terms is north of $200 a barrel. And financial markets, and we're all hoping that this will end very, very quickly for a range of reasons, humanitarian ones being the most important. The longer the war goes on and the more damage gets done to infrastructure, then the longer the impacts could linger. And that's when you start to see perhaps increased pressure on oil. Before all of this, the oil price was at $70 a barrel and nobody was terribly worried because there was a consensus view. There was a glut of the stuff out there. Now, if the producing infrastructure is damaged, you can't ship the stuff out. That's when we may get challenges. And the big nightmare then from the narrow perspective of financial markets and the economy is we go back to the 1970s, 73, 74 oil price shock, 79 oil price shock. That's when you got sustained bouts of inflation and interest rates ended up going to double digits to try and crush that inflation back out the system. That's the true worst case. And touch wood, we're a long way from that yet for a range of reasons.
Russ, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
I think, both those two guests, Russ and also Michael Clark, just underlines that this is an economic war, as well as a military war as well. Sure. That, those shockwaves really being felt almost everywhere, deliberately so as well. Coming up, we're going to be talking to the Conservative Shadow Minister, Julia Lopez. That's coming up in a few moments.
I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
We'd been warned that we would meet people in the lowest moment of their lives.
Their story is one of fundamental American failure. Well, a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club, but I have to say there are more media here than there are supporters.
We love Trump!
I've witnessed the remarkable passion for politics here, but the anger too. This is just the audience that Joe Biden wanted.
Is this the moment to reform gun laws?
It's easy to go to politics.
But it's important, it's at the heart of the issue.
For all the talk of a toned-down, humbled Trump, yes, maybe there was just a little less rhetoric, a little less divisiveness, but in the end it was the same rhythm, the same speech, the same man.
All them people that died in Russia and Ukraine, they'd still be alive today if Donald Trump was the president.
If it was my wish, have a businessman that's strong like Trump, but maybe just doesn't say as much,
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What we've been allowed to see over here is a humanitarian corridor. Free wherever you get your news.
A young American medical student is making remarkable things happen.
I've seen a lot of difficult things, and honestly, it breaks my heart. These children don't deserve that.
I don't think there's a single Arab I know who isn't seriously disturbed by what's going on.
And so they gathered for this wonder of nature.
I'm very excited right now.
This is an extraordinary moment beyond anything I could have expected. Sky News, get the full story first.
Well, hello and thank you for watching.
Tonight on The Wrap.
We will be joined by the very best commentators to explain the how and the why.
He did know what he was doing.
Both agree on that, can we?
No. You can expect more analysis.
This is going to get deeper. I think it's going to end up with Russia.
Is war inevitable? What he's interested in is a deal.
That doesn't rule out strikes.
I disagree.
And laughs along the way.
Plus, a look at tomorrow's headlines. The Wrap. Everything wrapped up for you from 10.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist?
They call him the king of the jungle.
Being a Sky News journalist.
Yusra al-Baghir has this report, and this is what's left of it.
As a woman of colour, how did the Harris campaign speak to you?
People risk their lives to speak to us for this report.
Mr. Zuma, Sky News.
We're trying to see as much as we can.
We've been talking for a while about the impact of the war in Iran on the global economy, and today, I'll be honest, feels like the day that we really understood the significance of that, with some huge jumps in energy costs, in borrowing costs. I think it is pretty clear that this is a war that, if it continues in this way, is going to be felt by all of us. So an awful lot for politicians here in the UK to get their heads around as well. We can talk now to the Shadow Secretary of State for Science, Innovation and Technology, Julia Lopez, who is here with us.
Hi, Sophie.
Look, I know you're here to talk about social media, which we will get to, of course, but we've seen these huge rises in all kinds of indicators, from, gas prices to oil prices to borrowing costs. How concerned should we be?
I think we should be very concerned. When we were in government dealing with similar surges in prices in relation to the war in Ukraine, we had to make very substantial interventions in energy prices to try and deal with that. And I think my worry as an MP is whether the government has the ability to make similar kinds of interventions to be able to shield people from these shocks and price rises coming through.
Yeah, I mean, we spent I think it was £150 billion or something in that region. It was an eye-watering sum of money.
And it's actually one of the things that's little discussed about the 2022 budget. There was lots of discussion about some of the tax cuts in that budget, very little about the size of the energy package that had to be put together to shield people. I remember when I was in government speaking to somebody in the Treasury who was very worried that we were going to see an 8-fold increase in the price of energy. And you have to, as a government, help people through that, help businesses through that. And I'm worried that the public finances will mean that there are very serious consequences if Labour was to try and do something very similar again.
The government are saying that it's actually you guys who didn't fix stuff at the time when you had 13 years in power, including our dependence on imported gas. So they say this is part of the issue, right? And if we need to invest more in renewables to try and give us more control over just these kind of shocks.
I think the government needs to get real about the situation we're in and start focusing on now. The Chancellor had the opportunity in the spring statement to recognise that everything has changed. When this government came in, it inherited inflation at 2%. Through its own policy choices, that is now at 3%. They've left us more vulnerable. Their spending choices have not been on defence. They have shut down...
Well, they have invested a lot of money in defence, haven't they?
Well, no, Sophie, that money is actually not flowing through into the system yet.
Yeah, but we don't want it to necessarily flow through now. You've got to work out what you're going to spend it on. I mean, if you look at defence procurement over the last 10, 20 years, that is the biggest lesson of all,
Defence Investment Plan, which is feeding the supply chain, which is going to make sure that we have what we need at the right time, has not even come out of the door. And the situation is getting very, very volatile. At the same time, they've shut down North Sea oil and gas production. So whatever they say about what's happened previously...
Stop new licences.
Well, and they
continue with the old ones.
Yes, but it's in a very volatile situation. They should be looking afresh at everything. They should be looking at green levies. They should be looking at how we increase production rather than increase our reliance on the Gulf. And I don't think there's any sense of the urgency of the situation and the fact that everything has changed. And the Chancellor had an opportunity in the spring statement last week to set out some of the challenges coming at us. And instead, she basically said, nothing has changed, everything is fine, wait till I give everybody a lecture in a couple of weeks' time. This is a very volatile geopolitical situation, and the Prime Minister and the Chancellor have made the choices on spending, which is to increase welfare very substantially, and I don't think that they recognise the peril that we're in.
Can I talk to you about social media? Because you are driving through some things in Parliament today to try and restrict it for young children. What's the idea?
Well, we think that actually we have to say as a society that there should not be harmful social media if you are under 16 years old. There's been, this has been a growing challenge over many years, and countries across the world are coming to very similar conclusions at the same time, which that you can try and make various different discrete interventions, but actually we have to be changing how we view this. Much like we look at alcohol and other things where you have a very clear set of rules, we think that we need a clear set of rules in relation to whether social media is not good for our children and young people. I think that it's obvious to many parents, many children themselves, and to teachers that this is not just about whether children are accessing illegal material, it's whether there is other harms being done in terms of concentration, in terms of some of the abilities for people to contact children, and we think that you have to take a very clear view on this now.
OK, thank you very much indeed, Alex, speaking to us from the Conservative Party.
Now, just a couple of minutes left. We want to bring you this story because there's urgent calls for Australia to take action before the Iranian women's football team return to Iran.
Yeah, so the Iranian women's football team have been out there playing in the Asian Women's Cup, but they stood silent during the Iranian national anthem. They didn't explain why, but many people have interpreted that as a message against the regime. Some hardliners inside Iran even saying it could be a sign of treason. And now there is a concern that they won't be safe if they get in that tour bus, get on the flight and return back to Iran.
There's been quite a lot of coverage this throughout the tournament where they didn't sing the national anthem, even before, actually, the war took off. In fact, kind of more aligned with the protests from January, February, and just the extraordinary bravery from those female footballers for doing it. And I guess we'll see if they do get forced to go back.
There's been a lot of discussion as well about footage of the tour bus, so the Iranian women's team on this tour bus, and whether or not they were doing a sign behind the windows, like an SOS sign, or almost to try and ask people to help them, because obviously things have moved very quickly in Iran. We have the new Ayatollah in place, the son of the previous one, of course, who is not exactly known for his liberal views, shall we say.
Amazing bravery shown by them. Let's have a look, as we go to break, of the latest situation in the Middle East. This is a live shot we've got for you of Beirut. As you can see, smoke coming from a building there in the centre of Beirut. Ongoing issues, of course, across the region, not just there, and it's taking its toll on financial markets as well.
Those images of smoke have become to be quite familiar to us here on Mornings, as we really do see the impact this conflict is having across so many places in the region. We'll continue our coverage on the war in Iran, in the Middle East and across the world in just a few moments.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist? I'm going to take you behind the scenes here for Election Night Live. They have gone up and up. Being a Sky News journalist. Ed Conway, Sky News, is anyone going to talk to us? Mortgage rates did go up very sharply during your time in office. Here it is. First off, just the scale of what we're looking at. Our data shows it's been happening. Question is, why it hasn't been stopped.
Good morning to you. It's 9 o'clock. Welcome to Mornings with Ridge and Frost.
Well, Sophie and Wilf, good morning from me as well. It's been a dramatic morning of movements on the economic scale to the war.
The price of oil skyrockets, sending Asian markets plummeting and European markets lower as the impact of the war in Iran begins to spread just beyond the Middle East.
Speaking exclusively to Sky News, Qatar's Prime Minister tells us he feels a deep sense of betrayal from Iran's attacks on his country.
This miscalculation by the Iranians to attack the Gulf countries has destroyed everything.
We'll discuss what we can expect in the coming days as Iran's new supreme leader is announced.
A huge fire has engulfed Glasgow Central Station after starting in a nearby vape shop. There's going to be travel disruption today. Good morning. Well, since the war in the Middle East began just over a week ago, there's been real warnings about the economic impact of a sustained war. And today, those fears are becoming a reality. The price of oil has gone up more in the last 24 hours than in any other day in the last 6 years. Later today, the finance ministers of G7 countries are going to meet to try and work out what to do and discuss releasing some oil reserves themselves.
And that news of that phone call taking place and the potential to release some supplies of oil from reserves actually brought oil prices back down a little bit. But let's show you the extent to which they've risen. So overnight, when we came in this morning, they were up 25%. That took Brent crude up to $114 a barrel. Since that announcement that there'll be potentially some release from reserves to temporarily boost oil supplies, we've come back a little bit, but we're still up at $108 a barrel. And just overnight itself, we're still talking about a 15% increase. That comes after last week was the biggest weekly gain on record. Oil prices were up about 35% last week. And don't let's forget that as we started this year in the month of January and February, just on the prospect of potential Middle East conflict, oil prices rose then about 25%. All told, we're up so far this year nearly 100%. I just want to remind viewers what the former Chancellor Jeremy Hunt told us last week, that there's a sort of rule of thumb in the Treasury that a 10% increase in oil prices could have a negative 0.1% impact on the country's GDP. So if we're talking about a 100% increase, you're potentially looking at GDP falling by about 1 whole percentage point. That is, if this persists, and that's really the big question now. Do we see things temper back if the conflict goes down? Let's have a look at this scale of increase over the course of the last 6 years, because that captures two crucial recent moments for us. It shows us COVID, when we thought that no one was going to travel anymore. That was the scale then of the fall in oil price. It shows us Russia's invasion of Ukraine. That was the scale then of the increase in the oil price. And it just shows how big an increase we're talking about today. As big, if not bigger, than those two recent moments. Again, how long will it persist? If for years, like Russia's invasion of Ukraine, we're in serious trouble. Let's see how long it does persist. What does this mean for equity markets? They're lower. In Asia, they were sharply lower. Of course, a lot of the oil coming out of the Strait of Hormuz goes to Asia, so they're directly impacted, but it's a global price. It affects markets across the world. FTSE 100 down 1.6%, Germany down 2.5%, a bit more than that. All important, though, is our borrowing costs. We said last hour how it was a relatively calm open to borrowing costs. Well, that hasn't really held, sadly. If we look at the 2-year yield, you can see since 10 days ago, when this all started, we've gone from 3.5% up to now, 4.25%. A reminder, the Bank of England base rate is at 3.75%. This, therefore, now is suggesting not only that we're not going to get rate cuts anytime soon, we might possibly have rate hikes. Sophie, it really highlights how everything has changed. If this current conflict and the disruption persists, then we're in a whole new economic environment.
Oh, goodness me, it really does. I mean, honestly, it just feels like this morning is the day that kind of reality hit. It's an economic problem. It's a political problem as well, because, look, this is a government that has pinned itself on prioritising the cost of living, right? So whether that is energy bills, supermarket bills, they're constantly talking about the cost of living. This whole year was supposed to be a focus for the government on the cost of living. And yet now this has happened, and I mean, look, the whole thing, it feels like we're in a different playing field, doesn't it? I spoke to Steve Reed about this a little earlier. This is what he had to say.
As things stand, people will get £150 off their energy bills in April, and that's locked in then for 3 months. Perhaps this situation will be resolved within that time, and that's what we all hope for. But if we want to plan for the long term and plan not to be subject to price increases if conflicts happen in places like the Middle East, then we need to shift away from dependence on fossil fuel towards clean energy, and that's precisely what the government is doing.
The reason that I'm talking about the promise you made on energy bills, look, it's not your fault what's happened. You know, you weren't involved in this action.
Yep.
But I think the point I guess I want to say is that you're promising things that you don't know if you can deliver. You don't know if people's bills can go down £300 if global prices go. And if I could, Rachel Reeves' spring forecast last week, she pegged this government's fortunes to inflation coming down. This is not something that you can always control. Why do you keep promising things that you don't know you can deliver?
Well, as you say, we can't control all the events that may happen all the way across the world that will affect the country. What we can do is put ourselves in the best position possible to withstand those shocks.
Steve Reed's obviously not in charge of our energy policy, not in charge of our taxes, and things are moving very fast, so I don't particularly blame him for this. But I do wonder, in the course of the next week or so, whether the government steps back and says, did we miss a trick last year? When President Trump announced tariffs in April, did we miss a trick to come out and say, look, we're not going to hit this certain target that we set ourselves, but it's not our fault, it's President Trump's fault, and change people's expectations when you can blame it legitimately on factors outside your control. And that's just what I wonder whether they'll do in the short term. You asked exactly the question. Are we really going to get £300 off our energy bills? A manifesto pledge that they could kind of nix off and say, sorry, it's not our fault. We were on track to lower them by £150 by April, July this year. We now can't promise that will last, but it's not our fault. And I just wonder whether there's that political dynamism that would see them try and frame things a little bit differently.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a massive political issue, as you say, Wilfred. They're going to work out a strategy for dealing with it. Now, the Prime Minister of Qatar has made an urgent plea for all sides to de-escalate, telling Sky News that Iran's made a dangerous miscalculation in attacking Gulf countries. He was speaking to our colleague, Yada Hakim.
It's been something really significant to see the attack, which was showing that being pre-planned, like once the war started, just maybe an hour after the start of the war, Qatar and the other Gulf countries being attacked right away. And all of us, before this war and repeatedly, we've been saying and repeating that we are not going to take part of any attacks or any wars against our neighbors. We would like to see a peaceful neighborhood. We were helping Iran and the United States in reaching diplomatic solutions. But this miscalculation by the Iranians to attack the Gulf countries has destroyed everything. Our countries don't want to be part of this war, and we would like to see them stopping right away.
Yeah, it feels like one of the most striking things about this conflict has been Iran's determination, I guess, to target other countries within the Middle East. How do you think places like Qatar have been reacting to it?
Yeah, I mean, Sophie, you could see the anger there on the face of the Prime Minister. This is a man and this is a country that likes to present itself as perhaps one of the few countries on the planet that mediates, that's a bridge, and that, negotiates some of the most complex crises on the planet. And yet they're perplexed that somehow they've been dragged into this conflict when they've always had open channels, diplomatic channels with Iran, even when Iran has faced global isolation. Certainly after the 12-day war last year between Israel and Iran, Qatar worked tirelessly to try and resurrect those nuclear talks. In the lead up to this conflict, they were having multiple conversations with the United States, with the Iranians, so that it wouldn't get to this stage. So the fact that they've now been dragged into this, you heard there from the Prime Minister this sense of betrayal that they feel, that, you know, they're saying that it's not just military installations or bases that are being targeted, but he's saying that they're hitting civilian infrastructure, they're hitting desalination plants in this region, they're hitting energy infrastructure that isn't just having an impact on the region, but it's having an impact on the global economy. He talked there about Qatar having to stop gas production and the fact that they supply 20% of the world's gas and what kind of impact that is going to have. He's saying that we're seeing that not, you know, in 3 months' time or 6 months' time. This is going to have implications from now. Fertilizer he talked about as well. So, and that fact that that would impact global food security. So this is going to have wide-ranging implications, not just for this region, but the world. And the fact that this region has been dragged into this by the Iranian regime with no end in sight. And frankly, just a few days ago, Iran's president came out and said, we don't want to hit neighboring countries. You know, we're willing to sort of come to some kind of agreement. And then within hours of making that statement, certain you know, sites were hit again, which has left them sort of confused about what the end game is here for Iran and for the United States.
Yada, what are their views there in Qatar and other regional players towards the US now?
Well, I think what you heard there from your guest earlier, Wilf, is confusion about what the objectives here are. I asked the Qatari Prime Minister what he made about the objectives, and it didn't seem clear. He said the United States has laid out what they want to get from this, but what exactly is the end game here? He couldn't quite give an explanation, the Qatari Prime Minister, about what the day after plan is, what the end game is, and certainly that's the criticism that we are seeing come out 10 days into this conflict towards the United States, towards Israel, when frankly within 10 days the death toll is now at almost 2,000 according to the Red Crescent Society, the majority of them in Iran. We saw horrifying images at the weekend of oil refineries blowing up, airports targeted not just in Iran but across the region by the regime as well. So there's a lot of anger in this region towards all sides. You know, on Saturday morning last week when this war started, residents across this region were angry at the United States and Israel for starting this war. By Saturday night, there was anger towards Iran for dragging them into this. So they're saying we have nothing to do with this war. We have, you know, no real stakes or interest in getting caught up in it. And somehow, day in, day out, there are missiles being launched. And we could hear the interceptors and loud explosions over the skies of Doha, drones attacking various different sites. And they don't seem to be able to de-escalate the situation. In fact, the rhetoric and the number of targets from both sides that they're hitting only seems to show an escalation rather than the other way around.
Yada, great stuff. Thanks so much.
Well, we're 10 days now into the conflict, but Iran does have a new supreme leader. You'd be forgiven, though, for feeling that it doesn't feel like much has changed. Because the new leader chosen is Mojtaba Khamenei, and he is the son of the old leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. You're watching now Iranian state TV that broadcasts footage of supporters celebrating the appointment. It was chosen by the clerical body in charge of supervising and choosing the supreme leader. They've had that role since the revolution in 1979.
Let's bring in Diana, who's in Jerusalem. Diana, what is the significance of this choice?
Well, I think it is more of the same, as Sophie was saying, Wilf, and he arguably, from scholars who study these figures, is even more hardline than his father was, which doesn't bode well for the way this war is going to go. You haven't seen him in public, and there's not much footage of him in the past. He's inherently quite a secretive figure. He held a sort of backseat role in the office of his father, but there he really did command a kind of central nexus between the militant clergy, between the Revolutionary Guard, the Basij militias, and he was responsible over the last decades for really integrating the Revolutionary Guard into all the structures of the country, into the politics, into the economics. You know, they own large chunks of the economy, and into the security establishment. He fought in the Iran-Iraq war back in the 80s, where he developed these contacts with the key military leaders. He was very instrumental in suppressing the protests movement in 2009 all the way through to the present. So he's very much a hardline figure. And I think also worth noting that, you know, given this interview that Yalda has done and the sort of consternation of the Gulf countries, obviously, at the way Iran is attacking them, he was a teenager fighting during the Iran-Iraq war when the Gulf countries allied themselves with Iraq against Iran and against the Shia ideology that it represented. And therefore, when you hear the Revolutionary Guard saying, you know, we will target you countries that host the United States, he will be very much part of that movement. So I don't think we're going to be seeing any kind of let-up from Iran in terms of their targeting the Gulf anytime soon. Israel, of course, has said that he is a wanted man. The United States president has said that he wouldn't be acceptable as a leader. But it's not just in the last 10 days that his name has come up as a possible successor to the previous supreme leader. It's long been discussed, will he succeed him? Not exactly a revolutionary way to succeed. I mean, you're meant to be appointed by this clerical body. It shouldn't be from father to son, as it was during the monarchy, which, you know, the revolution came along after. But we shall have to see how long he lasts and whether he dares to raise his head above the parapet, given the threats against his life from the United States and Israel.
Diana, great stuff. Thank you so much for that. By the way, we just wanted to bring you a live picture because you might remember we showed you this at the top of the hour, Beirut, just before we went to break, and there wasn't as much smoke as we're looking at now. Just, again, a reminder of the ongoing situation there at major capitals across the region. Beirut clearly burning, as you can see there. This is the moment that it struck, rewinding the clocks by a few minutes. Quite clearly an explosion that triggered the fire and smoke that we were showing you live moments ago.
And it really is a reminder of the impact that this conflict is having on multiple fronts. You can see there Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon, and obviously other airstrikes going on across the Middle East too. Here in the UK, of course, it has had a political consequence as well as an economic consequence. Keir Starmer, I guess, still grappling with that relationship with Donald Trump, but also, perhaps most importantly, trying to work out how to best insulate the UK from any economic shock. Alex Rogers is here to discuss that with us. He's really going to be looking at that this morning, isn't he, with the spikes that we've seen in UK borrowing costs, but also, of course, in the price of energy.
Yeah, so he's meeting business leaders, parents, that kind of thing this morning, I think, to try and reassure people that the government is not going to stand by and see people struggle. We don't know what that looks like at the moment. There's calls for the hike in fuel duty that's scheduled for September for that to be cancelled. Could he end up capping energy bills? I mean, it could be really costly, but for a government that's put the cost of living crisis at its core, I think the Prime Minister will think he'll have no choice but to act.
It clearly, as you say, would end up costing a lot, and that's one of the reasons you're seeing borrowing costs rise, the prospect of more government spending in this area. What about the latest between Trump and Starmer? They did speak yesterday?
They had a call. We think it was around 20 minutes. I think what's quite striking is that the readouts that Downing Street give from this they're quite brief, don't really say much, just said the pair spoke about the situation in the Middle East, which is obviously quite general, and military cooperation between the two sides. But I guess Downing Street will be pleased that they are still at least talking, and will be pointing to that and, you know, saying that the special relationship is still very much on track. That's what Steve Reid was saying to you earlier, Sophie. He said it was, I think he said it was constructive and, you know, deep and enduring. So that's the line that they're giving in public. But clearly, when Donald Trump keeps issuing these stinging criticisms, like that's that's going to be damaging, definitely.
Yeah. This isn't always an art, I feel, to kind of reading between the lines of these reports into calls between world leaders, sometimes seeming to bear very little reality to the tone and the content of the messages. But who knows in this case? Maybe it was great and all is forgiven. We shall see. Alex, thank you very much indeed.
A reminder, a special programme on the Iran war. Yael, they'll be hosting that for us 1 p.m. from Doha, as well as full contributions from the team across the region, 1 p.m. here on Sky News.
Coming up, we are going to be talking about a fire that's broken out near Glasgow Central Station. It's the busiest rail station in Scotland. It's now said to be under control. Those are the latest live pictures there, but clearly there'll be some real damage to that iconic building.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News presenter?
We've done the work and the reading, so you don't have to.
Being a Sky News presenter.
Hello and welcome, Westminster, the heart of British politics. I'm so sorry about what happened to you. So what on earth is going on?
It's not true.
Can I tell you what I think is really unusual? Mornings with Ridge and Frost. Let's crack on. Let's get started.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News journalist?
Who's funnier?
Being a Sky News journalist. A special edition of The World with me, Yalda Hakim.
Pakistan has the right to respond.
You're like, what?
A historic day here today. Congratulations, this is a huge moment. But what happens now?
Now, a huge fire has forced Scotland's busiest railway station to close until further notice.
The fire broke out at a vape shop and engulfed a 4-storey B-listed Victorian building on Union Street in Glasgow, and it spread close to Central Station in Glasgow. Sadia's here to tell us a bit more about it, and it's now under control?
It is now under control. It has been for a few hours, but it was a huge fire. We've got some pictures to show you that just show how dramatic that fire was. As you say, it started at a vape shop, which was on the ground floor of this 4-storey building, but you can see that fire has gone right to the top. And that dome, iconic on Union Street, it's part of the city's skyline. It is a very famous street with a busy shopping district. And as you say, Glasgow Central Railway Station is closed until further notice. We expect an update on that later this evening. Huge flames, chunks of the building falling off, I think you can see in those pictures. And it is really close to the station. The station in that video we're just looking at now is visible as that sort of glass roof structure behind the dome, which is on fire. And just to explain to you how big this fire was, Scottish Fire and Rescue Service say that they were first alerted to this at 3:46 yesterday in the afternoon. At 8:30, they issued another statement and said that they were still tackling the blaze. These pictures that our camera person took in Glasgow were just before midnight, so you can see that just how long it took to get that fire under control. There are no reports of casualties, but it is a favourite building for many Glaswegians, so they'll be waking up to a deep sense of loss this morning.
Obviously, we don't know how it started. That'll come out in the investigation. But vapes catching fire is, we don't know, I should say, in this instance, but it's a huge issue. You know, it's something that has really been rising and surging in, like, bin lorries, shops. It's actually a really big growing problem as well. So interesting to see what the cause of the fire was there in Glasgow.
Sadia, great stuff. Thank you. Now, before we get back to the war, in the Middle East, some good news to bring you. The number of people dying from cancer in the UK has fallen to a new historic low.
Yeah, it feels like me and Wolf are always bringing you really awful news, particularly at the minute. And so this is actually a really nice story. It's cancer deaths down 11% in the last decade. So to give you the full stats, 247 in every 100,000 people in the UK thought to die from cancer in any given year, which is obviously, you know, still really high and a massive tragedy. But it's a 29% drop on the peak, which was back in 1989. Some particular cancers with really big drops: ovarian cancer, stomach cancer, lung cancer, also cervical cancer down, and that's partly because of the HPV vaccine that's given to school children as well. So just these remarkable advances in science.
Yeah, it's great advances. I mean, I think the central point that we've talked about over the last 6 months, is why the government brought out a new long-term cancer strategy, is that our progress relative to some other developed countries has been lagging. The scientific advances are so significant that perhaps we could be making quicker progress on these numbers, but nonetheless, this is a good moment, even if we should be aiming even higher going forward.
Yeah, it's an important qualification, and I guess it just shows you, doesn't it, like science and the way forward and the impact that it can really have.
We'll take a quick break. When we come back, more on the very latest coming out of the Middle East, including the impact on energy markets and borrowing costs being felt here. We'll be right back.
Hello again. Let's return, shall we, to our top story we're covering this morning, which is that the price of oil is soaring. The economic cost of the war in Iran really disrupting not just, of course, countries in the region, but across the world as well, and also, of course, impacting borrowing costs and all kinds of things as well. The person we have got to talk through all of this, I'm very pleased to say, is Michael Clark, who is always the person we want to hear from in moments like this. The military cost and the personal cost is obviously massive. I'm thinking in particular of that school that we saw in Iran. But this is becoming an economic war as well.
Yes. And when it began on the 28th of February, the sense was maybe this will be a 3 or 4 day affair and something dramatic is in the wings and will happen. Clearly, that wasn't happening. And the Iranians escalated from the very beginning. They didn't, the war was not contained. The Iranians immediately began by hitting out, which is part of the strategy. And the Iranians obviously calculate that they can, in a sense, outlast America, not militarily, but politically. So if they can make this war as painful as possible for the region and for the world economy, the calculation is, it seems, that President Trump will feel so many pressures from the world economy, from his own base, from the cost of living in the United States, and maybe some losses, military losses, which will be very painful. There are already a few, but say there were 20 or 30 or 40, then at some point, quite soon, it is thought, I think in Tehran, that he'll declare victory and go home. And they will still be there. Whatever the damage, they will still be there. And indeed, if the Americans declare victory and go home, the Iranians may say, well, we're not stopping. We're going to keep the Strait of Hormuz closed. We will still attack shipping. What are the Americans then going to do? Go back in and fight the Strait of Hormuz? There's lots of ways in which, although the Iranians ultimately must lose militarily, they figure that they may be able to win politically in 2 or 3 different ways. Because the United States has got this enormous military machine, but it still does not have a clear view of what it's trying to do with it. This is still a war looking for a strategy.
One thing with it having persisted for this 10th day, I guess, that comes to mind for me is, would we have expected the US and Israel to have eliminated more of Iran's missile launching capability by now, after 10 or 11 days of opportunity to do so, or not?
Not necessarily. Israeli intelligence estimated that the Iranians had 2,500 missiles, ballistic missiles, before this began. And they've got tens of thousands of drones. They've boasted about the number of drones they've got. And almost all of them are mobile. So almost all of them are on TLs, which is a transporter erector launcher. So it's a truck. And in the case of even the biggest missile, the Khorram Shah, which is their longest range 2,000-kilometre missile, it's still off the back of a truck. And, the thing erects itself, lifts off and fires the missile. And the Shaheeds, the Shaheed 136 drones, these are the little drones of the one, well, not so little, but cheap drones, $30,000 each, of the sort that hit RAF Akrotiri. There are 5 on the back of a truck. So a truck that can look like any other truck suddenly pulls the back off, and these 5 Shaheeds can sort of raise up on racks, and 5 of them can just go like that. And they're off and away. So the Americans can bomb these things, they can get them, but it's like whack-a-mole. Every time you see the mole, you whack it, and you just have to keep whacking it. Now, the way they do that is to run a taxi rank system for their aircraft. So they have aircraft circling. They have their airborne warning and control aircraft, the AWACS, and they've got a U-2, which links the F-35s directly with the F-22s without going to a ground link. So the U-2 is circling, and the 35s are there, and the 22s are there. It's all very complex stuff. As soon as they see something on the ground, they bring in the taxi rank, they bring in the aircraft, which is just circling without a mission, and say, there's your target, and off they go, and they get it. So it's very efficient. But if you're after a few thousand of these things, it's going to take a while.
And I guess Iran can just prolong things by firing fewer. And is that why they suddenly target desalination, or they target fewer but more high-value targets?
Well, nobody's sure. What CENTCOM are saying, Central Command, and Dan Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, he said, their launches have diminished rapidly, 80% fewer than they were in the first few days. And that the implication is that the Americans are getting more of the launches, more of the missiles. That's possible, but it's also plausible, given what we know of the numbers that the Iranians have started with, that they're holding them back because they're having to make a calculation between those which they know will lose and will be shot down and those that they will still have in 2 weeks' time, 4 weeks' time, 6 weeks' time. And so they're probably trying to eke out their stocks in order to remain a threat for as long as possible. That seems to be their strategy. And at the moment, it may work. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if we don't see a couple of real spikes in the use of missiles, of spikes in Iranian launches, in order that they can prove to the world and to the American public that they've still got quite a punch left. If I was them, that's what I'd be looking to do. I'd be looking to create a moment in a week's time or a few days' time with a big spike in launches, which would be designed to appear in the American press.
I should say we are awaiting to hear from Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister. When we do, we'll jump straight on that. But I'm very keen to get your view on the new Supreme Leader of Iran, Mojtaba. There you go, you've got much better pronunciation than me. What should we read into his appointment?
They're doubling down on it. Mojtaba he had no official role except that he was close to his father, and his father was 86. So presumably, Mojtaba was actually taking quite a lot of decisions. I mean, he had an early career in the military. We know he's close to the IRGC. He is a mid-ranking cleric, but he's now with the Ayatollah. So he's jumped to the Archbishop of Canterbury, in a sense. So he's a hardliner. Now, the thing is, he probably will not be that influential because he's got to hide. I mean, he's now, he probably figures that his days on this earth are probably numbered.
And that's because the Americans are expected to take him out.
Yeah, and the Israelis. They've said, we will. As soon as you name him, we'll go after him. So that probably means that he won't be very efficient. He'll have to hide a lot. But remember, he probably has priced that in because, I mean, in the 28th of February, in the strike that killed his father, he also lost his wife and his sister and his child and his brother-in-law. He's seen his family destroyed, and he probably feels, well, I'm next, and that's God's will, and there it is. No, so who's making the decisions? Probably not him. So Larijani seems to be making most of the political decisions, and I think he's probably, quite important. Military decisions, nobody's entirely certain. There's 2 or 3 candidates who are running the IRGC.
We had a really moving interview with someone earlier on the programme who was part of the protest, risked his own life, saw the guns on the streets in Iran. Is there any hope that, the brave people of Iran might be able to choose their own leader, or are we way, way out of that situation?
Well, at the moment, the war has had the effect of strengthening the grip of the regime over the streets because they use the Basij, who are the militia, and there's said to be 600,000 of them. That may be an overestimate, but if there's 220,000 IRGC personnel and let's say 500,000 Basij, and the Basij, the militia, these people live by the regime. They're paid for, they're paid by the regime. They get jobs because of the regime. Their families depend on the regime. So they have a reason to want the present system to survive. And they go around on motorbikes. And they will shoot people without too much conscience if they think that they are acting. The people they see on the streets could be agents of the satanic United States. So at the moment, the repression is greater now than it was before the war began. Now, that doesn't say it won't crack. It might crack. But it's hard to see just at the moment what would create that. And when President Trump, as we assume he will, when he declares victory and leaves, he'll probably say, well, we offer the people their opportunity. They decline the opportunity to come out and get shot. It was their own fault.
We're jumping in because this is Keir Starmer speaking in London.
It's really good to see you here, and thanks for taking time. I just wanted to acknowledge that a lot of you and a lot of people across the country will be very anxious about the situation that's unfolding with the conflict in Iran going now into its 9th day. And I know that people are watching that. They're concerned about that. And I wanted to reassure you about some of the measures that we're taking as a government. The first is the work we're doing with allies in the region. So the countries in particular that are under attack, many of the Gulf countries who obviously have played no part themselves in any attack on Iran are nonetheless being attacked. So as you would imagine, we're working very closely with them, helping with defensive capability. We've got fighter jets in there, and we've increased the capability there over the course of the last 9 days. Anti-drone devices, radar, and lots of other work that we're coordinating. And I've been speaking to all the leaders in the region, some of them a number of times over, to assess how they feel the situation is on the ground, what more we can do. These are allies, these are friends of our country we've been working with for many years. So that's what we're doing on that front. The second big issue is obviously we've got about 300,000 British nationals in the region. Some of them live there, have done for some time. Some of them are on holiday there. Some of them were just changing planes. And they're all very concerned about the situation they're in. And I know that friends and family in this country are very, very concerned because they want to know that their loved ones are safe. So we're working with commercial airlines, working with all the countries involved to make sure that, firstly, people register their presence. 300,000 are there in the region. 120-something thousand have registered their presence. That means we're in touch with them and we can help them, give them information and advice. And where they want to come home, make sure that with commercial airlines and charter airlines, we're providing the means for them to get back. Not always easy because the airspace is closed in some places for some of the time, depending on the threat levels. But we got 35,000 back so far, and we're working, as you'd expect, around the clock in relation to those operations. The third area I just wanted to address, because I think as we go into this sort of what feels like the second week of this conflict, a lot of people are going to begin to think, well, that's happening out in Iran and in the Gulf states, but I can sense it's going to affect me back here in the United Kingdom, particularly the economy. We've done a lot of work recently on the cost of living, which we know is the #1 issue for so many people across the country, and an anxiety about that. On the reassurance front, I think it is important just to remind ourselves that last time a conflict began to develop, which was 2022, in relation to Ukraine, the economy wasn't in a stable place, and inflation was 5% and rising. We've done a lot of work in the last 18 months to put some resilience in and make sure that we've got some headroom, which is basically some insurance within the economy, but also inflation is 3% and going down. So in that sense, there's more resilience. But the job of government is obviously to get ahead, to look around the corner, to work with others. And the Chancellor speaks to the Governor of the Bank of England on a daily basis. We're looking cross-departmental within government, assessing the risks, monitoring, and talking to our international partners as well about what more we can do together to reduce the likely impact on people here and businesses here, of course. But it is important to acknowledge that that work is needed because people will sense, you will sense, I think, that the longer this goes on, the more likely the potential for an impact on our economy, impact into the lives and households of everybody and every business. And our job is to get ahead of that, to look around the corner, assess the risk, monitor the risks, and work with others in relation to that. And then the final thing I just wanted to talk to you about, and we're going to have a Q&A in a minute so I can get the benefit of your views, which will be really helpful from my point of view, is this really sad feature in many ways of a conflict like this, which is some people will try to use it to divide communities in this country and tear people apart. And we mustn't let that happen. I find one of the most powerful arguments that if you think of all the people who are stuck in the region, anxious about their own safety, wanting to get home, they come from all backgrounds. They come from all walks of life. And the last thing they want, or their families here want, is anybody trying to divide. Because this is a time when we need to come together as a country, stand behind our principles and our values, and not let people divide us. Put a lot of reassurance work in with both the Muslim community and the Jewish community in particular, because that's where people seek to try and find a divide. But we're also setting out our social cohesion plan today, which is a broader piece of work about how we bring people together as a country, make sure that we build on what we all care about, which is very much pride in our communities, pride in who we are as a country, pride, of course, in the places that we all come from. Everybody's got a pride about where they come from. And that real sense of making sure that we do integrate and we're one country standing together, particularly at a time like this, and that we bear down on extremism and division, because it's very important all the time to do that. It's particularly important at the moment. And so that's what we're doing as we turn into this week. So I think what you'll see is the focus going more to what impact might this have back in the United Kingdom. This will be happening across all countries, really, and really to reassure you about the work the government is doing to get ahead of that and to monitor the risk, assess the risk and work with others across our own government, but actually with other countries. Part of the response at a time like this has to be constantly talking to leaders in other countries, particularly in the region, but also across Europe when it comes to the economy and other measures. So that's all I'll say for now. I think I've got some questions from you, so this is your chance. Anybody got any questions that they want to ask? I think we'll do the old-fashioned way of putting a hand up, if that's all right. Yes, I'll try and do a question behind me whilst facing this way. It's always a skill, but hopefully I can master it. I think we've got a microphone coming for you so you can be heard.
Is that okay?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Good morning. My question is, what are you doing to bring communities together in this world that is so divided, and what is in place?
Yeah, this is really important. I mean, it is a really sad feature, isn't it, of a time like this, that some people will try and use it as an opportunity to divide. So I think on two levels we're working. The first is...
Keir Starmer there meeting people at a community centre in London, gamely, I think, speaking to the Grid story, which is about community cohesion, but obviously as well an acknowledgement from the Prime Minister, significant, I thought, that there is likely to be what he described as an impact on our economy. That admission there from the Prime Minister saying that it's government's job to look around the corner to try and help businesses and families navigate any economic shock, particularly, of course, around the cost of living. He did say that the UK economy was more resilient than it may have been in dealing with that economic shock because of falling inflation. But of course, I think it is significant still to hear from the Prime Minister that they are expecting an impact on the cost of living and are currently trying to find ways, in his words, to look around the corner to help families.
With us still to discuss all this, Professor Michael Clarke and also Chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, Emily Thornberry. Emily, welcome. Thanks for joining us. So far, rating out of 10 for Keir Starmer and handling what has been a crazy 11 days?
Oh, look, it's been really hard. And it's very, very unusual for a British Prime Minister to say no to an American president. I think that the last time it happened was Wilson. So a long time ago. But it was right. It was right to say that we shouldn't be involved in offensive action against Iran because there wasn't a plan, because it isn't in Britain's interests, and because it's not legal. And they didn't even try to claim that it was illegal. I mean, like, even Putin pretended that attacking Ukraine was legal and he put up some sort of excuse, but they haven't even done that. So I think it is right. And I think it's now right that we try to protect our friends and our allies, since Iran seems to be just attacking people willy-nilly. So since we've got assets in the area to try to shoot down drones and missiles and so on, which we have been doing quite successfully. So I think it is the right way to do it. And I think you need to have a cool head in these circumstances. And that's what he's been exhibiting. Good for him.
We've seen a pretty big economic shock today, I think it's fair to say, right? Yeah. And you could tell by Keir Starmer talking there that right at the forefront of his mind is cost of living, something this government has kind of pushed itself to.
Absolutely. Because it's at the forefront of people.
Exactly.
I mean, that's, you know.
And it feels like there's a live discussion at the minute within Cabinet and ministers about how far to go, how much money to commit. I mean, what's your sense of it?
So we've seen a huge, great increase in the cost of oil, and that will have an impact on the economy if it's sustained. And we just don't know how long this war is going to go on. And they're closing the Straits of Hormuz, and they now seem to be attacking infrastructure of the oil of the Gulf states. So it is potentially really serious. I mean, so I think that's why the G7 finance ministers are meeting, aren't they? And they're talking about potentially releasing emergency stocks of oil, which I suspect they're going to need to do because we can't. I mean, much as we want to kind of scramble towards a green economy, we're still dependent on oil. And we have to do all that we can to keep the price down, of course.
Michael, a brief set of comments there from the Prime Minister about extra military resources going to the region. Was there anything new you learnt? And just remind us of the assessment of what is going and when it will be there.
Well, in air power terms, the RAF is working pretty hard at the moment. So there are extra Typhoons to Akrotiri in Cyprus. Also, 12 Squadron in Qatar at Al Udeid is working very hard. I mean, that's this joint RAF-Qatar squadron. It's very successful running Typhoons, and they didn't think they'd be doing this. I mean, they're normally based at Cottesmore, but now I think the whole squadron's, as you'd expect, pretty well out in Qatar, and they are shooting down drones. So the RAF's working pretty hard. The Navy's having a terrible time. For reasons that we could talk about. So, but the Dragon, HMS Dragon, is not going to leave maybe today. And it's 2,600 miles from Portsmouth to Akrotiri, and that's 6 days sailing at an average speed of 18 knots, which is what you might expect it to do. 7 days of it stops in Gibraltar to take on more ammunition and stores. So you're talking about several days when Dragon leaves. And meanwhile, there's quite a lot of naval congestion going on around Cyprus. So there are warships there at the moment from Greece, from France, from Italy, from Spain and from Germany. Everyone's there but us. So the Navy is having a torrid time, and there are reasons for that. But in general, what the Prime Minister was really trying to say was that there are lots of ways of defending yourself against this sort of thing. So we're concentrating on air defence, we're concentrating on Typhoons, because we can get them there. But, I mean, as of today, then I feel like something out of a carry-on film. As of today, the Navy can put to sea 1 aircraft carrier, 3 ships and 1 submarine. That's it. That's the Royal Navy, as of today, what they can have at sea.
What do you say to that, Emily?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I'd say is that it's not fair to say that they're standing around, which is what Kemi Badenoch has said. I mean, it's not fair on the people of the RAF who are risking their lives over the skies of the Gulf as we speak. Yep. So, I mean, I think we need to say it. But, yeah, I mean, during the whole time when the Conservatives were in power, I was saying, where are the friggin' frigates? Why aren't you building them? You keep saying you've got plans for building them, but we never see them. We never see new ones being built. We've got these massive great aircraft carriers without enough aircraft to go on them, without enough ships to be able to protect them.
We're jumping, so we're going to hear from Kirsten.
He's disappointed in you, that you're no Churchill, and that gas and oil prices going through the roof is, quote, a small price to pay. It will feel to many people like the special relationship is in tatters. Were you able to begin to mend it in your phone call yesterday? And also, can you just reassure people that the government will have their backs on energy? Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Let me address a number of points there. The first is it's really important to emphasise that the US and the UK are working together every single day, as they always have. Obviously, in relation to Iran, the US are now using UK air bases under the agreement that we've reached. But more generally than that, intelligence is being shared every day. In the region, we have our military personnel and US military personnel co-located in the same places, in the same bases. And both the US and the UK are working together, protecting those bases. So in terms of the relationship, the work that we necessarily have to do together is going on as you'd expect. I had a telephone call with President Trump yesterday talking about the conflict in Iran and the region and what we were doing together, and that was important in terms of the ongoing discussion. But the discussion with our US counterparts is happening at all levels, all of the time, every single day. That's the nature of the relationship. What I would say is this, is that decisions about what's in Britain's best interests are decisions for the Prime Minister of Britain. And that's how I've approached all of the questions and all the decisions that I've had to make. It is really important, that's a fundamental principle, that it is the UK Prime Minister who everybody expects, the people of the United Kingdom would expect, that the UK Prime Minister would make the decisions using our values, our principles, in the best interest of our country. And it's really important that we are very, very clear about that principle. We're obviously working more generally with leaders and allies across the region, both in relation to the defensive work that needs to go in and in relation to the work to get people out of the region. Very many British nationals are there. So thank you for that. David, can I come to you?
Thanks very much, Prime Minister. Yeah, just want to ask about, you've come here today to acknowledge the cost of living pressures that this situation in Iran could present for people here in this room and across the country. That they're going to be worried about their pockets and the effect on the money in their pockets. What practical steps might we actually see from the government to help people